One of the 28th by G. A. Henty. Chapter 12. The Cave Among the Rocks. At 5 o'clock on the following morning Ralph was roused by the landlord, who brought him a candle. He lost no time in dressing, buckled on his sword, looked to the priming of the double-barrelled pistols Mr. Penfold had given him, and placed them in his belt. Then he went downstairs and put the handcuffs into the pocket of his greatcoat. He then went to the bar, where the landlord was kindling a fire. "I want a bottle of whisky, landlord, a loaf of bread, and a big lump of cheese." As he was waiting for these, Lieutenant Desmond joined him. "That's right, Conway. There's nothing like laying in a stock of creature comforts when you have the chance. Look here, landlord, get an empty bottle and put half the whisky in, and then fill them both up with water. Cut that loaf of bread in halves, in that way we can get it into our pockets. That's right. Now do the same with the cheese. You and I may not be together, Conway, so it's just as well to divide the commissariat, to say nothing of the convenience of carriage. Now, have you got the handcuffs? That's right. We'll be off at once." The landlord went to the door with them and looked after them, somewhat surprised at seeing no soldiers about. "What can they be up to by themselves at this hour of the morning?" he said to himself. "Well, they're two nice young fellows anyway, and I hope that they're not going to get into mischief. Now I'll just make up the fire and then sit down for a half an hour's snooze in my armchair. The captain says he's to be called at 6. I suppose they're going out still hunting somewhere. Well, I wish them luck, for when the boys can get their whisky for next to nothing, they don't care about coming here, and small blame to them, for I shouldn't myself." Not a soul was astir in the village as the two young officers passed along. They turned off at the lane leading to the sea, and after proceeding a quarter of a mile came to a point where the roadway ended, the path beyond this being merely a track. Here there was a gate across the lane, and a wall running right and left. "We can't find a better spot than this, Conway," Lieutenant Desmond said. "If we sit down one on each side against the wall, 100 men might pass along without noticing us." "Which side shall we sit on, Desmond?" "We will sit this side," the lieutenant replied. "If we were the other side, a man might possibly wrench himself away from our grasp, and might outrun us, but on this side of the gate he couldn't do so, for even if he did break away, he'd have to run back toward the village. The gate would stop his going the other way." Accordingly the young officers took their posts against the wall, one on either side of the gate, and with their swords drawn awaited the coming of a messenger to the Red Captain. "There's no chance of anyone being here for another 20 minutes, Desmond said. "The sergeant will not rouse the men up till 6:15, therefore no one is likely to come along until within a few minutes of the hour. It's precious cold here, though the wall does shelter us from the wind a bit. Still, it's not a lively job having to wait here half an hour with the thermometer somewhere below the freezing point." The time passed slowly. Occasionally they exchanged a few words in low tones, but as the time approached when they knew that the sergeant would be going his rounds to call the men, they spoke less. "It must be nearly 6 o'clock now," Desmond said at last. "The men would be called at 1:45, so if anyone's coming he'll most likely be here in a few minutes. Hush, hush, I think I hear footsteps." A few seconds later they dimly saw a figure running toward them at full speed. As it dashed up to the gate they sprang out and seized it. There was a sharp, frightened cry. "Don't make a noise," Desmond said sternly, "or it'll be the worse for you. Where were you going?" It was a girl of about 12 years old whom they had captured. She was silent a moment. "Sure, your honor," she said in a whimper, I was doing no harm. I was only running to tell Mike Brennan that his old mother's taken bad with the cramps and want to see him bad." "And where did you expect to go to, you little liar?" Desmond asked. "We know what you're up to. You were running to tell someone that the soldiers were getting up. Now if you're quiet and keep still, no harm will come to you, but if you try to scream or get away we shall hand you over to the police, and there's no saying whether they may not make it a hanging matter for aiding the king's enemies." I suppose we needn't fasten her," Ralph said. "Not fasten her? Why, she's as slippery as a young eel, and if you take your hand off her for a moment she'd be off like a hare. No, we must make her safe. Beside," he whispered in Ralph's ear, "she'd scream to a certainty if she saw anyone else coming. Then they might strike off and get round us. No, we can't run any risks. There's too much depending on it. Now just sit down there, young woman, by the wall. We're not going to hurt you, but you have got to keep quiet. Now put your feet together." Desmond took out his pocket handkerchief and folded it, and tied the girl's ankles firmly together. "Now then, Ralph, do the same with her wrists. That's right. Now wrap that shawl of hers 3 or 4 times tightly round her mouth. That's it. Let her breathe through her nose. Now, you keep a sharp watch over her, and see she doesn't wriggle out of these things. If you see anyone coming, clap your hand over her mouth and see she doesn't make a sound. When he comes up, you can let go and help me if necessary. It won't matter her giving a bit of a scream then. Now," he went on, this time speaking aloud, "if that girl makes the least noise, run her through with your sword at once. Don't hesitate a moment." "Very well," Ralph said in the same tones. "I will silence her, never fear." Ralph sat down close to the girl and watched her sharply. They had fixed the shawl as well as they could, but he felt sure that by a sudden effort she would free her mouth sufficiently to scream. She sat perfectly still, but in about 3 minutes he saw her suddenly throw her head back, and in an instant he clapped his hand over her mouth. She struggled violently in spite of her bonds and tried to bite, but with the other hand he held her head firmly and succeeded in preventing the slightest sound escaping her. Then he glanced up the path. As he had expected, the girl's quick ear had heard approaching footsteps that were inaudible to him. A figure was bounding rapidly toward them. As it reached the gate, Desmond sprang upon it. There was a sharp scuffle for a moment. "All right, Conway, I have got him." It was a lad of some 15 years old this time. He struggled furiously till Desmond placed a pistol against his head and told him that he'd blow his brains out if he was not quiet, and taking out the handcuffs fastened them onto his ankles. "There's no fear of his doing any running now. Just come and sit down by this wall, my lad, and remember, if you make the slightest sound I will run my sword through your body." The lad shuffled to the wall and sat down. Ralph released his grip of the girl. "This is a regular young wildcat, Desmond. She very near got my hand in her mouth, and if she had she would have bitten a piece off. Well, I shouldn't think there will be any more of them." "No, I should think not. They would scarcely send off more than 2 messengers. However, we must still keep a sharp lookout." But no one else came along, and in a quarter of an hour they heard the deep tramp of a body of men approaching, and Captain O'Connor soon came up at the head of the company. "Well, any news, gentlemen?" he asked as the 2 young officers stepped out. "Yes, Captain O'Connor. We have 2 prisoners, a girl and a boy. They came along about 10 minutes apart, both running at full speed, and evidently going with messages. We put the handcuffs on the boy's ankles and tied the girls with our handkerchiefs. Sergeant, tell off 2 men and let them take these prisoners back to the village and guard them carefully till we return. They may as well keep the handcuffs on the boy's ankles and untie the girls, but let one of them keep a tight hold of her arm and be sure that she doesn't slip away." 2 men were told off for the duty, and the march was then resumed. Daylight was faintly breaking when they reached the edge of the cliff. Ralph, with 10 men, was posted at the spot where a slight track was visible going down into a sort of gully. Captain O'Connor then proceeded with half the company to the right, Desmond taking the remainder to the left, each posting men at intervals along the edge of the cliff, and placing parties of 4 at every point where there appeared the smallest probability of an ascent being practicable. All were ordered to load at once. They were to make prisoner anyone coming up the cliff, and in case of resistance to fire without hesitation. The 2 officers then returned to the spot where they had left Ralph. It was now nearly broad daylight. Leaving the soldiers, they went a short distance to a point where the rocks fell away precipitately, and from here had a clear view of the face of the cliffs. "We had better wait here for a time," the captain said. "The chances are that before long one of them will look out from their hiding place, and perhaps make his way up to the top to look round. If he does, that will give us an index as to the direction, at any rate, of their hiding place. Now I will take the ground in front. Do you watch to the left, Conway, and you to the right, Desmond. We'd better lie down, or on this jutting point we may catch the eye of anyone down there before we can see him. Keep a sharp lookout, lads. It will save us a world of trouble if we can see one of them." For half an hour they lay quiet, and then Desmond suddenly exclaimed, "There's a man among those fallen rocks halfway up the side. There. He's gone. Perhaps we shall see him again in a moment." For 5 minutes they lay with their eyes fixed on the rocks that Desmond pointed out, but there were no signs of life. "Are you sure you were not mistaken, Desmond?" O'Connor asked. "Quite certain. He suddenly appeared by the side of that grey boulder, stood there for a moment, and sunk down again. I expect he must have got a view of one of the men somewhere along the top." "Well, we'll wait another 10 minutes," O'Connor said, "and then we will take a party to the spot and search it thoroughly. There's the coast guard boat, so there is no fear of their getting away by water." Another quarter of an hour passed. "Well, it's no use waiting any longer. Go along the line, one each way, and bring 10 men from points where they can be spared. We'll leave them at the top of the path and take the party there down with us. There are only 4 or 5 of them, and 10 men besides ourselves should be ample for the business." The arrangements were soon made. Before starting on the descent, O'Connor said to the men, "We wish to take the fellows who are hiding down there alive, if possible. They are the gang of the fellows known as the Red Captain, and have committed a score of murders. But if it's absolutely necessary, you will, of course, fire. There is one man among them who is there on compulsion, and is less guilty than the rest. He's a fair-haired man, and I should think you would notice the difference between him and the rest. Whatever resistance they make, it's not probable that he will join in it. At any rate, do not fire at him unless it's absolutely necessary to save life. Now, see to your priming before we start, and fix bayonets. Mind how you climb over these rocks, because if any of you fall, your muskets may go off and shoot someone in front of you. Wherever it's possible, scatter out, abreast of each other, so as to prevent the possibility of accident. Now then, march." Leading the way, Captain O'Connor descended the little track. It extended but a short distance. Beyond that, a chaos of fallen rocks, the remnants of a landslide many years previously, stretched away to the shore. "There's no working along these sideways, Desmond," Captain O'Connor said, after they had climbed along for some little distance. "We'd better make straight down to the shore, follow that for a bit, then mount again to the spot where you saw the man." It was difficult work, but at last the party reached the shore. Lieutenant Adcock, who was himself in command of the boat, had watched the party making their way down the rocks, and now rowed in to within a few yards. "Good morning, Lieutenant," Captain O'Connor said. "I think we've got them fairly trapped, but doubtless they would have made off if they hadn't seen you on the watch outside. It's that notorious scoundrel, the Red Captain of Galway, who is, I hear, hiding here with his gang." "Indeed," the revenue officer said. "That'll be a capture worth making. Shall I come ashore with 4 of my men? I expect they are more accustomed to climbing about among the rocks than yours are, and I should like to lend a hand." "Oh, do, by all means," Captain O'Connor replied. "I see you've got 10, and 6 will be quite enough in the boat, even if they do manage to get down and embark, which I don't think they will. Your men are all armed, I suppose?" "Yes, they have all carbines and cutlasses. Now, coxswain, I leave you in charge. Row out a quarter of a mile, and if any boat pushes off, you are to stop it and arrest all on board. They will almost certainly resist, and in that case you must use your arms. Now, the 4 bow oars, get out and step ashore." When the lieutenant and his 4 men had landed, the boat again pushed off, and the party on shore made their way along over the rocks at the edge of the water until they were opposite the rock where Lieutenant Desmond had seen the man appear. Then the ascent was commenced. The 4 officers went first, the men following in a line. "Bear a little to the left," Captain O'Connor said. "It's likely to lie somewhere in that direction. The man we saw would have been making toward the path and not from it. Now keep a sharp lookout between these great rocks. There's no saying where the entrance to their hiding place may be." Almost as he spoke there was a sharp crack of a rifle, and the bullet struck the rock on which he was standing. "Come on, lads," he shouted. "The sooner we are there, the less time they've got to fire." And with a cheer the men hurried forward, scrambling recklessly over the rocks. Again and again puffs of smoke darted out from the rocks in front, and one of the soldiers fell, shot through the heart. "Don't stop to fire," Captain O'Connor shouted, as a yell of rage broke from the men. "You'll do no good, and it will only give them more time." A dozen more shots were fired. One of the coast guardmen was shot through the shoulder, but this was the only casualty, for the quick movements of the men as they scrambled over the boulders disconcerted the aim of those above. Breathless and panting, the 4 officers gained the spot from which the shots had been fired, the men close up behind them, but not a soul was to be seen. "Wait a moment till you get breath, lads," their leader said. "They can't be far from here. We'll find their hiding place presently, never fear." As they stood panting, there was a shout from above. The soldiers were standing along the edge of the cliff, looking down upon the fight. Sergeant Morris waved his arm. "They've made away to your left, sir," he shouted at the top of his voice. "We've just caught sight of them among the rocks." In 2 or 3 minutes Captain O'Connor led the way in that direction. "Keep your eyes sharply about, lad. No doubt the place is cunningly hidden. Search among every clump of bushes between the rocks." Presently the sergeant shouted down again from above, "I think you are far enough now, sir. We did not catch sight of them beyond that." For an hour the search continued, but without avail. "They must be here somewhere, lads," Captain O'Connor said. "We'll find them if we have to stop here a week and have provisions brought down from the village. It's pretty evident that there's no opening between the great rocks, or we must have found it. We must examine the smaller boulders. They may have one so placed that it can be dropped down over the entrance. That flat slab is a likely looking place, for instance. 3 or 4 of you get hold of it and heave it up." The men gathered round to lift it. Ralph stooped down and peeped under as they did so. "Hooray, there is an opening here!" Several of the others now got hold of the stone. It was upended and thrown backward, and the entrance to a passage some 3 feet high and 2 feet wide was revealed. "I can smell a peat fire," one of the men exclaimed. "This is the entrance, no doubt," Captain O'Connor said. "See, the bottom is evidently worn by feet. The passage must have been used for a long time, but it's an awkward place to follow desperate men into." "It is indeed," Lieutenant Adcock agreed. "They could shoot us down one after one as we go in. They would see us against the light, while we should be able to make out nothing." "Surrender in there!" Captain O'Connor shouted. "You can't get away, and I promise you all a fair trial." His summons was followed by a taunting laugh, and a moment later there was a sharp sound within, and a rifle bullet struck the side of the entrance and flew out. "It would be throwing away one's life to go in there," Captain O'Connor said. "At any rate, we've got them secure, and they must come out in time. But it would be madness to crawl in there on one's hands and feet, to be picked off by those scoundrels at their ease. Now, lads, 2 of you stand by this entrance. Keep out of the line of fire, and be ready with your bayonets to run anyone through who comes out. Let the rest scatter and search round this place. They may have another entrance. If so, we must find it. In the first place, it may be easier of entry. In the second, they might escape from it after dark." Again the search began. "Do you think it's likely to be higher up or lower down, O'Connor?" Lieutenant Desmond asked. "There is no saying, Desmond. The passage seems to go straight in. I should fancy above rather than below." For a long time they searched without success. Then Ralph, who had gone higher up the rocks than the rest, came upon a clump of low bushes growing between some large boulders. There was nothing suspicious about them, and he was just turning away when he perceived a slight odour of peat smoke. Silently he made his way down to the captain. "I have found another entrance," he said. "At any rate I think so, for I certainly smelled smoke. If we go quietly we may take them unawares." Captain O'Connor passed the word along for the men to gather silently, and Ralph then led the way up to the clump of bushes. "Yes, I can smell the peat plainly enough. Now, Conway, do you search among the bushes. Carefully, lad, we don't know what the place is like." Cautiously Ralph pushed the bushes aside. He saw at once that these had been carefully trained to cover a large hole. This was about 3 feet wide, and descended at a sharp angle, forming a sloping passage of sufficient height for a man to stand upright. Captain O'Connor knelt down and looked in. "Now this looks more possible," he said, "but it's very steep. I should say it's not used by them, but acts as a sort of chimney to ventilate the cavern and let the smoke out. At any rate we'll try it, but we must take our boots off so as to get a better hold on the rocks. Besides, we shall make less noise. Blunt and Jervis, do you go down to the other entrance again. It's likely enough that they may try to make a bolt that way if they hear us coming. Now keep a sharp lookout down there, and be sure no one escapes." "Don't you think, Captain O'Connor, that it will be a good thing to enter from there also the moment a row is heard going on within? Their attention will be taken up with your attack, and we may get in without being noticed." "That's a very good idea, Conway, and you shall carry it out. Take 2 more men with you, and make your way in as soon as you hear us engaged. But remember that it's quite possible we may not be able to get down. The passage may get almost perpendicular presently, and though I mean to go if possible, even if I have a straight drop for it, it may close up and be altogether impracticable. So don't you try to enter until you are quite sure they are engaged with us. Otherwise you will be only throwing away your life." "I understand, sir," Ralph said as he turned to go off. "If you get in you can reckon on our assistance immediately. If not, we shall make no move." Ralph now took up his station at the mouth of the cavern with his 6 men, and lay down just in front of the opening, listening attentively. He could hear a continued murmur as of many voices. "Get ready, lads, to follow me the instant you see me dive in. I am sure by the sound that there are more than 4 men in there, and Captain O'Connor may want help badly." Grasping a pistol in his left hand and his sword in his right, Ralph listened attentively. Suddenly he heard a shout, followed by a volley of imprecations, and then the discharge of a gun or a pistol. In an instant he threw himself forward along the low narrow passage. He had not gotten more than 3 or 4 yards when he found that it heightened, and he was able to stand upright. He rushed on, keeping his head low in case the roof should lower again, and after a few paces entered a large cabin. It was dimly illuminated by 2 torches stuck against the wall. In a moment a number of figures rushed toward him with loud shouts, but before they reached him 2 of the soldiers stood by his side. "Fire!" he shouted as he discharged his pistol, and at the same moment the soldiers beside him discharged their muskets. A moment later he was engaged in a fierce hand-to-hand conflict. Several firearms had flashed off almost in his face. One of the soldiers fell with a sharp cry, but those who were following rushed forward. Ralph narrowly escaped having his brains dashed out by a clubbed rifle, but springing back just in time he ran his opponent through before he could recover his guard. Just at this moment a big man with a shock of red hair and a huge beard levelled a blunderbuss at him. It flashed across him that his last moment had come, when a man behind leaped suddenly upon the ruffian's back, and they fell to the ground together, the blunderbuss going off in the fall and riddling a soldier standing next to Ralph with slugs. For 2 or 3 minutes a desperate struggle went on between Ralph and his 6 men and those who attempted to break through them. Sturdily as the soldiers fought, they had been driven back toward the entrance by the assailants, armed with pikes and clubbed guns. There was no sound of conflict at the other end of the cave, and Ralph felt that the attack there had for some reason failed. "Shoulder to shoulder, lads," he shouted. "We shall have help in a minute or 2. He had emptied both his double-barreled pistols. His sword had just broken short in his hand while guarding his head from a heavy blow. He himself had been almost struck to the ground, when there was a rush of men from behind, and the rest of the soldiers poured in. "Give them a volley, lads," he shouted, "and then charge them with the bayonets." The muskets rang out, and then there was a shout of "We surrender! We surrender!" A minute later the men were disarmed. There was still a desperate struggle going on the ground. "Here, lads," Ralph said to 2 of his men, "secure this red fellow. He's their leader. One of you bring a torch here." The light was brought. It was seen that the man who had sprung upon the red captain's back had pinioned his arms to his sides and held them there in spite of the efforts of the ruffian to free himself. 2 of the soldiers took off their belts and fastened them together, passing them between the back of the man and his captor, then strapped his arms firmly to his side. The man who held them then released his grip. "Stand over him with fixed bayonets, and if he moves, run him through. Now, where's Captain O'Connor?" "I don't know, sir. He and Mr. Desmond and the naval officer went down the hole in front of us. We were following when the naval officer shouted up to us to run round to this entrance and make our way in there, for he could go no farther." "I'm here, Conway," a faint voice said from the other end of the cabin, "but I have broken my leg, I think, and Desmond has knocked all the wind out of my body." Ralph hastened to the spot whence the voice came, and found Captain O'Connor lying on the ground, and Lieutenant Desmond insensible beside him. "What has happened?" Ralph exclaimed. "Have they shot you?" No, hold the torch up and you will see the way we came." The soldier did so, and Ralph looked up to see a hole in the top of the cave 20 feet above. "You don't mean to say you came through there, O'Connor?" "I did, worse luck of it. The passage got steeper and steeper, and at last my foot slipped and I shot down and came plumb into the middle of a peat fire, and a moment later Desmond shot down on the top of me. We scattered the fire all over the place, as you can imagine, but I burned my hands and face, and I believe the leg of my breeches is on fire. At least something is hurting me confoundedly." Yes, it's all smouldering," Ralph exclaimed, putting it out with his hand. "Have you got them all?" Captain O'Connor asked. "Everyone. Not one has made his escape. It would have fared badly with us, though, if Lieutenant Adcock had not sent down the men to our assistance. Where is your leg broken, O'Connor?" "Above the knee," the captain said. "Well, here's some whisky and water," Ralph said, handing him his bottle. "Now I'll see what's happened to Desmond." Then he stooped over the insensible officer. "He's got a nasty gash on his forehead, and I think his right arm is broken. I'll pour a little spirits between his lips, and then he had better be carried out into the air." That was done, and then Ralph went outside and shouted to Sergeant Morris to bring down another 20 men. "If you please, sir," one of the coast guardsmen said, touching his hat, "I don't see any signs of our officer. Have you seen him?" "No," Ralph said, "but perhaps he's still in that passage. You'd better run up to the top and see." 2 minutes later the man returned. "He's down there, sir, but he says he can't get up or down." "Well, you'd better run down to the boat at once," Ralph said. "I see she's close inshore. Bring a couple more of your men up with you, and a rope. If you tie that round your body you can go down and bring him up." Ralph then returned to the cavern, where the men were still guarding the prisoners. "You can march them outside now, then make them sit down and stand over them with fixed bayonets till Sergeant Morris arrives. Now let us look to the wounded." An examination showed that 2 of the soldiers were dead, and 3 others badly wounded. 7 of the party in the cave lay on the ground. 1 only was alive. The rest had fallen either from bullet or bayonet wounds. Seeing that nothing could be done here, Ralph looked round the cavern. He soon saw that just where Captain O'Connor had fallen there was an entrance into another cave. He reloaded his pistols before he entered this, but found it deserted. It contained 2 large stills with mash tubs and every appliance, 200 or 300 kegs of whisky, and some 30 sacks of barley. This at once accounted for the cave being known, and for the number of men found in it, for in addition to the 7 that had fallen, 6 prisoners had been taken. The walls of the cave were deeply smoke-stained, showing that it had been used as a distillery for a great number of years. "Yes, that is satisfactory," Captain O'Connor said, when Ralph reported to him the discovery he had made. "That place where I came down is of course the chimney. Peat does not give much smoke, and making its way out through that screen of bushes it would be so light that it would not be noticed by anyone on the cliffs. Well, it's been a good morning's work. A band of notorious scoundrels captured and an illicit still discovered in full work. It was a cleverly contrived place. Of course it's a natural cavern, and was likely enough known before the fall of rocks from above so completely concealed the entrance. I wish those fellows would come, though, for my leg is hurting me amazingly, and these burns on my hands and face are smarting horribly. Shout out to them on the cliff, Conway, and tell them to send at once to fetch Dr. Doran from the village. The wounded ought to be seen to as soon as possible, and it's likely enough that some of them cannot be taken up over the rocks to the top of the cliff. I dread that business myself." In a quarter of an hour Sergeant Morris arrived with his party. By this time Lieutenant Desmond had recovered consciousness, and although in great pain from his broken arm, was consoled upon hearing of the complete success of the expedition. The soldiers were furious on hearing that 3 of their comrades had been killed, and 2 of their officers badly injured. "Sergeant," Ralph said, "bring 4 of your men into the cave with me. Now," he continued when they entered, "there is a pile of blankets in that corner. Take one of them and fasten it across 2 of the men's muskets, so as to make a litter. Then we must lift Captain O'Connor carefully and put him on it and get him outside. It will be a difficult business getting him through the narrow entrance, but we must manage it as well as we can. But first let us thoroughly examine the caves. There may be another entrance somewhere." Searching carefully, they found a passage behind the stack of kegs. It was some 8 feet high and as much wide. They followed it for a short distance, and then saw daylight. Their way was, however, speedily blocked by a number of rocks piled over the entrance. This was evidently the original entrance to these caves, Ralph said, but it was covered up when the rocks came down from above. That would account for the place not being known to the coast guards. I thought the passage we came in by looked as if it had been enlarged by the hand of man. No doubt it was originally a small hole, and when the entrance was blocked, the men who made up their minds to establish a still here thought that it would be the best way to enlarge that, and to leave the original entrance blocked. Well, it's evident we must take Captain O'Connor and the wounded out by the small entrance. It will be a tremendous business to clear those great rocks away." Captain O'Connor and the 2 wounded men were with great difficulty taken through the narrow passage. The soldier who was alive was the one who had received the charge of the blunderbuss in his legs. He was terribly injured below the knee, and Ralph had little doubt that amputation would be necessary. The other man lived but a short time after being brought into the air. Ralph now turned to the peasant who had saved his life by grappling with the Red Captain at the moment he was about to discharge his blunderbuss, and who had by his orders been left unbound. He was sitting a short distance from the other prisoners. "Your name is Denis Moore?" he said. "It is, your honour," the man replied in surprise. "Though how you came to know it beats me entirely." "I heard it from your wife last night," Ralph said. "From Bridget?" the man exclaimed. Why, I thought she was 100 miles away." "She came down here like a brave woman to try and save you," Ralph said, "and gave us information that brought us to this hiding place. But her name is not to appear, and no one will know how we heard of it. We promised her that no harm should come to you if we could help it, and thanks to the act by which you saved my life, you have escaped, for being down on the ground you were out of the line of the fire of our bullets. Of course, at present we shall treat you as a prisoner, as you were captured with the others, but I think we shall manage to let you slip away. Your wife is to remain at Dunmanway till she hears the news of this affair, and that you are safe, and she bade me tell you that you would find her at home, so no one will dream that either she or you had any hand in this affair. Now, point me out which are the 4 men that belong to this gang that brought you down here." "Well, the man who just died was one of them," Denis replied. "None of the other 3 are here, so I expect they fell in the cabin. They were in the front of the fight. I saw one go down just as I grappled with our captain." "Well, so much the better," Ralph said. "As to their leader, there will be no difficulty in getting evidence about him. The regiment he belonged to is in Dublin, and they can prove the shooting of his officer. Besides, they can get any amount of evidence from Galway." "Aye, they'll be ready enough to speak out now that the whole gangs are down," Denis Moore said. "They would not have dared to open their lips otherwise. The other prisoners all belong about here. One of their party is the captain's brother. That's how it is they came to take us in. But I think they would have been glad to get rid of us, for the Red Captain's lot were too bad for anything. And it isn't because the men are ready to cheat the king's revenue that they are fond of such villains and murderers as these." In a short time the doctor arrived. He had brought a case of instruments with him. "There's nothing for it but amputation here," he said when he examined the wounded soldier. "His legs are just splintered. The sooner I do it the better." Sergeant Morris and 3 of the men held the poor fellow while the operation was performed. As soon as it was over the doctor applied splints and bandages to Captain O'Connor's leg and Lieutenant Desmond's arm, and dressed the wounds of 3 of the other men who had suffered more or less severely. Chapter 13. Startling News. "What do you think is the best thing to be done now, Doctor?" Ralph asked. "I don't know," he replied. "I don't see how on earth we are going to get them over these rocks and up to the top. A slip or a fall would cost either of your friends their limbs and that poor fellow his life. I don't see how it's to be managed. It's hard work for a man to climb those rocks, and how a litter is to be carried I can't see. Now, if anywhere else I should say build a hut for them, but it would be a tremendous business getting the materials down, and I don't think it could possibly be managed by night." "Well, I'm sure it couldn't," Ralph said, shaking his head. "I think, though, if we got 2 long poles and slung a piece of canvas like a hammock between them, we may possibly get them down to the shore. You see, we have plenty of strength to get them over rough places." "We could manage that easy enough," Lieutenant Adcock, who had some time before joined the party, said. "There are some 16-foot oars in the boat and some sails. We could easily rig up the hammock. I suppose you mean to take them off in the boat, Mr. Conway?" "Yes, that's what I meant," Ralph said. "Then you can land them in your cove, and they might stop in the village till they are fit to be moved." "That would be an excellent plan," the doctor said. "Let us set about it at once." In half an hour the sailors brought up the hammock. "I will go first," Captain O'Connor said, "as I am the heaviest. You will see how you manage to get me down. If it's done pretty easily you can bring down the other 2. If not, they had better stop in the cave for tonight, and we'll get a hut for them tomorrow. By the way, Conway, you had better get the dead carried out and taken down to the seashore. Have them laid down out of reach of the tide. Some of them belong about here, and their friends will wish to give them a decent burial. Our own dead had better be put in the boat, if Mr. Adcock will allow it, and taken to the village with us. Then they can be carried over to Ballyporrit for burial. A corporal with 4 men must be left for tonight in charge of the caves." "I shall want my men to row the boat," Lieutenant Adcock said. "In the morning I will send over a warrant officer and 4 men to take charge of the cave till I can take its contents round to our stores." Captain O'Connor was now lifted into the hammock, and 6 sailors carried him down to the water. They managed it excellently, easing him down with the greatest care over the rocks, and succeeded in getting him down to the sea without a single jerk. Lieutenant Desmond and the wounded soldiers were then taken down in the same way, while the men carried down the dead bodies of their 3 comrades and of the peasants who had fallen. "I'll take charge of the wounded," Lieutenant Adcock said, "and see them comfortably housed and cared for. I suppose Dr. Doran will go with us?" "Certainly," the doctor said, stepping into the boat. "I shall not give up charge of them until I see them all safely in bed." "I shall come over and see you, O'Connor," Ralph said, "as soon as I get the company back to the village. Shall I write a report of this business, or do you feel equal to doing so?" "I will manage it, Conway. I can dictate it if I don't feel up to writing it. But you had better not come over today. There will be a good deal of excitement over this capture, and no doubt several of the killed and prisoners belong to Ballyporrit, so it wouldn't do for you to leave the detachment without an officer. Be sure you have a strict guard put over the prisoners, and keep an eye upon them yourself. You can send over to inquire about us, but till you have gotten them off your hands you had better not leave the village. If a party are wanted for still hunting, send Sergeant Morris with them. I shall dispatch my report tonight, and no doubt the colonel will send an officer out to help you just as soon as he gets it." The boat now pushed off. A corporal and 4 men were told off to occupy the cave until relieved by the revenue men, and then, with the prisoners in their centre, the party climbed the cliff, and again having been joined at the top by the rest of the company, marched to Ballyporrit. They found the village in a state of excitement. The soldier who had gone to fetch the doctor had brought the news that a fight had taken place down on the face of the cliff, but he could not say whether any had been killed. As soon as the detachment returned with the prisoners in their midst, many women flocked round with cries and lamentations, and exchanged greetings with the prisoners. Ralph at once took possession of the stables at the inn, and saw that the prisoners were all handcuffed, the Red Ruffian's legs being also securely bound. Then he placed 2 sentries inside and 2 out. The news that some of the men had been killed soon spread, and many of the villagers who did not see their relations among the prisoners hurried off toward the scene of action. Ralph informed the landlord that the dead had all been placed together on the seashore, and that their friends were at liberty to remove and bury them without any questions being asked. He then sent a corporal over to bring back news how the wounded men had borne the journey, and how they were disposed. But before his return the doctor drove up in a trap that he had borrowed. "Adcock has put up the 2 officers in his own house," the doctor said, "and his wife will look after them, so you need not worry about them. The other poor fellows are in the cottage next door. It belongs to the coxswain of the boat, who is also a married man, so you need be under no uneasiness about any of them. As far as I can see, they are all likely to do well. I shall go over first thing in the morning, and will bring you news of them as soon as I get back." Ralph had given orders that Denis Moore was not to be treated as a prisoner, and he now told the sergeant to send him in to him. "I have been thinking it over, Moore," he said, "and it seems to me the best plan will be to allow you to go quietly away. Your conduct in the fight in the cave in itself showed that you were not voluntarily with the others, and I do not think, therefore, that it is necessary to report you among the prisoners. I suppose the Red Captain's gang have not done any unlawful act beyond taking part in the still business since they took you away from home?" "No, your honor. We just came straight here, travelling at night and hiding away by day." "Very well. In that case you can give no special evidence against them. It is probable that at the trial evidence may be required from Galway as to the deeds that red bearded scoundrel committed there, and it is possible that you may be summoned with the others, but I should think that the evidence of the constabulary will be sufficient. So if you will give me your address there, I will take it upon myself to let you go at once. In that case you can join your wife this evening and travel back with her." "Oh, thank you, sir, thank you," Denis replied. "I have no objection at all to give evidence as to what I know, so that it does not come out it was Bridget who told you where they were hiding." "You need not be afraid of that, Denis. Captain O'Connor gave her his word that her name should not be mentioned. At the same time I have no doubt he will claim for her the £100 reward that was offered, and if he obtains it, it will be sent to you, so that nobody will be any the wiser." "I should not like to take informers' money," Denis said. "Not in ordinary cases," Ralph replied; "but you see she spoke out, not for the sake of money, but to get you out of their hands. And considering how much mischief those fellows have done, and how much more they would have done had we not laid hands on them, it is a very different case from that of an ordinary informer. None of your neighbours will know that she has had anything to do with the capture of these men, therefore no one will be any the wiser, and no doubt £100 will be very useful to you. I am sure you deserve some sort of compensation for being dragged away from home, and for the risk you ran in that fight, for a bullet might just as well have struck you as any of the others. I know that if I were in your place I should accept it without the least hesitation. And now, as I don't suppose they have left any money on you, and as your wife is not likely to be very well provided for, I will give you £5 on account, and remember that I shall always feel your debtor for the manner in which you saved my life by springing upon that ruffian just at the critical moment." "You will deduct it from the other money, your honor?" Denis said, hesitating. "Certainly I will, Denis. I should not think of offering you money for such a service as you rendered me. Now, if you will just give me your address in Galway I will make a note of it, though I don't think it at all likely you will be wanted at the trial. They will most likely proceed against him on the charge of shooting his officer and deserting, for they will have no difficulty in proving that, as the regiment belonged to is in Dublin." Denis started at once to rejoin his wife, highly pleased to have got away so quickly. 2 days later Captain Morrison and Mr. Stapleton arrived from headquarters. "I congratulate you, Conway," the latter said heartily. "We all pitied your being ordered away to this dreary place, and now you have been getting no end of honour and credit. O'Connor's report speaks in the strongest terms of you, and says it was entirely owing to your promptness and courage that the band was captured, and his life and that of Desmond saved. The Cork papers are full of the affair, and the capture of that notorious scoundrel, the Red Captain, created quite an excitement, I can tell you. The only bad part of the affair is that we have had to come out here, for I'm afraid there is no chance whatever of another adventure like yours." "Oh, I fancy there are plenty more stills to be captured, Stapleton, and that's good fun in its way, though it involves a good deal of marching and hard work." "And how are O'Connor and Desmond getting on?" Captain Morrison asked. "I had a very good report of them this morning from the doctor, and now that you have come I shall take a trap and drive over and see them at once. I had O'Connor's orders not to leave here till you arrived." "You ought to go back yourself tomorrow morning, Conway," Captain Morrison said. "You are to take the prisoners in with an escort of a corporal and 10 men, and to hand them over to the civil authorities, which means, I suppose, that you are to take them to the prison." "I suppose I shall come straight out again?" Ralph asked. "Oh, I should think so, for with all this still hunting business 3 officers are wanted here. But of course you will report yourself to the colonel and get orders. Here are the orders he gave me to give you. You are to start early, make a 20-mile march, halt for the night, and go on again the first thing in the morning. You are to hire a cart for the wounded prisoners, and to exercise the utmost vigilance on the way. The men are to carry loaded muskets. It's not likely there will be any attempt at a rescue, but such things have happened before now. If anything of the sort should take place, and you find that you are likely to get worsted, your orders are that you are not to let the Red Captain be carried off alive. Put a man specially over him with instructions to shoot him rather than let him be taken away from them. The colonel will hold you harmless. The scoundrel has committed too many murders to be allowed to go free." "Oh, I understand," Ralph said, "and will carry out the orders. And now I will be off at once, for it will be dark in an hour." Ralph was glad to find that the 2 officers were going on better than he had expected. Lieutenant Desmond was already up, with his arm in splints and a great patch of plaster across his forehead. O'Connor was still in bed, and was likely to remain so for some time. The regimental surgeon was with him, having left the other 2 officers at the turn of the road leading to the village. "I am glad to see you, Conway," Captain O'Connor said cheerfully. "I was expecting you. The doctor said Morrison and Stapleton had gone on to Ballyporrit. None the worse for your brush, I hope?" "Not a bit," Ralph said. "The bump on my head caused by that musket blow hurt me a bit the first day or 2, but it's going down now. I'm glad to see you and Desmond looking so well." "Oh, we shall soon be all right, though I'm afraid I shall be kept on my back for some little time. Desmond is rather in despair because he's afraid his beauty is spoiled, for the doctor says that cut on his forehead is likely to leave a nasty scar. He would not have minded it if it had been done by a French dragoon's sabre, but to have got it from tumbling down a chimney troubles him sorely. It will be very painful to him when a partner at a ball asks him sympathizingly in what battle he was wounded, to have to explain that he tumbled head foremost into a peat fire." Desmond laughed. "Well, it is rather a nuisance, and you see, Conway, the ashes have got so ground up in the place that the doctor is afraid it will be a black scar. O'Connor chaffs me about it, but I am sure he wouldn't like it himself." "Why, my dear fellow, it's a most honourable wound. You will be able to dilate upon the desperate capture of the noted ruffian, the Red Captain, and how you and that noble officer, Captain O'Connor, dashed alone into the cavern, tenanted by 13 notorious desperadoes. Why, properly worked up, man, there's no end of capital to be made out of it. I foresee that I shall be quite a hero at tea fights. A battle is nothing to such an affair as this. Of course it will not be necessary to say that you shot down into the middle of them like a sack of wheat, because you could not help it. You must speak of your reckless spring of 20 feet from that upper passage into the middle of them. Why, properly done, the dangers of the beach at Badajoz would pale before it." "I'm glad to see that you're in such high spirits," Ralph said when the laugh subsided. "There's no fear of your being lame after it, I hope?" No, Dr. Doran says it's a clean snap of the bone, and it will, he thinks, mend all right. And as Macpherson, who has been examining it, says the same, I hope it's all right. It's very good of the colonel sending the doctor over to us, but I think Doran understands his business well, and has made a capital job of both of us." "How is Rowlandson doing?" "Oh, I think he'll do very well," the surgeon said. "Of course he's a little down in the mouth about himself. It's not a pleasant prospect for a man to have to go about on 2 wooden legs all his life. Still, it's been done in the service, and as the fight was a sharp one, and such an important capture was made, he'll get his full pension, and I shall strongly recommend him for Chelsea Hospital if he likes to take it. But he tells me he was by trade a carpenter before he enlisted, and I expect he would rather go down to live among his own people. His wooden legs won't prevent him from earning a living at his trade, and he is a rather good-looking fellow. I dare say he won't have much difficulty in getting a wife. Maimed heroes are irresistible to the female mind." "Well, that's a comfort for you, Desmond, anyhow," O'Connor laughed. "That black patch on your forehead ought to add 1,000 a year to your marketable value." The next morning Ralph marched with his detachment, and arrived at Cork without adventure. Here he handed his prisoners over to the civil authorities of the jail, and then marched up to the barracks. He at once reported himself to the colonel, who congratulated him warmly upon the success that had attended the capture, and upon his own conduct in the affair. "I will not keep you now," the colonel said, "for the mess bugle sounded 5 minutes ago. I shall see you again in the morning." As Ralph entered the mess room the officers had just taken their seats. He was greeted with a boisterous outburst of welcome. His comrades got up and shook his hand warmly, and he had to answer many inquiries as to how O'Connor and Desmond were going on. "Sit down, gentlemen," the major, who was president of the mess, shouted. "Conway has had a 20-mile march, and is, I have no doubt, as hungry as a hunter. Let him eat his dinner in peace, and then when the wine is on the table he shall relate his adventures in detail. Oh, by the way, Conway, I hope you have lodged that ruffian safely in jail." "Yes, sir, I have handed him over, and glad I was to get him off my hands, for though I had him handcuffed and his feet tied and brought him along in a cart, I never felt comfortable all the way. That fellow is as strong as a bull, and as he knows what is before him he was capable of anything desperate to effect his escape." "Yes, I remember the man well," one of the officers said, "for, as you know, I was in his regiment before I exchanged into the 28th. He was a notorious character. He had the strength of 2 ordinary men, and once or twice when he was drunk it took 8 men to bring him into the barracks. I am heartily glad he is caught, for the poor fellow he killed was one of the most popular men in the regiment, with the soldiers as well as with us, and if they could have laid hands on this fellow I believe they would have hung him up without a trial. I shall have real pleasure in giving evidence against the scoundrel, for I was present at the time he shot Forrest. I wasn't 5 yards away, but it was all over and the villain was off before I had time to lift a hand." After dinner was over Ralph gave the full story of the capture in the cavern, of which Captain O'Connor had sent but an outline. "That was a sharp fight indeed," the major said when he had finished. For a time you were greatly outnumbered, and in the dark discipline is not of much avail. I think on the whole you got very well out of it, and O'Connor and Desmond were lucky in having got off with a broken limb each." Ralph was detained some days in Cork, as he had to be present at the courthouse when the prisoners were brought up before the magistrates. After giving his evidence as to the capture, his attendance was no further required. All, with the exception of the Red Captain, were committed at once upon the charges of working an illicit still, and of offering a forcible resistance with arms to the authority of the king's officers. The Red Captain was charged with several murders, and was remanded in order that evidence might be obtained from the regiment to which he belonged in Dublin, and of the constabulary and other people in County Galway. Ralph then returned to Ballyporrit. A fortnight later the detachment was recalled, the colonel having received the news that the regiment would be shortly under orders for America. Lieutenant Desmond was able to travel to Cork at once, although still unfit for duty, and the surgeon reported that in another fortnight Captain O'Connor would also be fit to be removed. 10 days later definite orders were received for the regiment to be ready for embarkation as soon as the 2 transports which had been ordered round from Plymouth arrived. The soldiers are always fond of change, and although there were few more pleasant quarters than Cork, there was a general feeling of animation and excitement at the thought of service at the other side of the Atlantic. All officers and men on furlough were at once recalled. The friends of many of the officers came across from England to be with them till they sailed upon what was then considered a long and perilous voyage. Balls and dinners were given to and by the regiment. Officers overhauled their kits and belongings, getting what new things they required, bargaining with brokers for their furniture, and making all preparations for a prolonged absence from England. "Ah, Stapleton," Ralph said, as the young ensign came into his quarters one day in high spirits, "there will be a sad change come over you before long. You almost wished you might die on your way round here from London. What will be your feelings when you have to face the waves of the Atlantic?" "Don't talk about it, Conway. The very thought makes me feel queer. However, I expect I shall get on better now than I did last time. What an ass I was, to be sure, on that voyage." "Well, I do think your 4 months with the regiment have done you a world of good, Stapleton. You certainly were a stuck-up sort of person when you came on board in the Thames. I think it's an awful mistake for a fellow to be educated at home instead of being sent to school. They are sure to have to suffer for it afterward." "Well, I have suffered for it to some extent," Stapleton said. "The lessons I got at first were sharp ones, but they certainly did me good." "There's no doubt about that," Ralph agreed. "And I think there's a good deal of credit due to you, Stapleton, for having taken things in the right way. I wonder where we shall be stationed in America, and whether we shall have any fighting. Upon the whole, we've no great reason to be proud of our feats of arms in America, but I hope we shall do better next time. You see, in the last struggle we knew nothing of their tactics, and were at a great disadvantage, but after fighting its way through the peninsula, I don't think there's any fear of the regiment not giving a good account of itself, if it is called upon to do so, out there." The next day an orderly came into the room just after mess dinner had commenced. He whispered to the adjutant, who at once rose. "Mr. President," he said to the major, who was at the head of the table, "I must ask you to excuse me leaving the table. The colonel wishes to see me immediately at his quarters." "Now, what can be the matter now?" one of the officers said. "It must be something of importance, or the colonel would never have called Hallowed out in that way." "Heard of some stillaway among the hills, I suppose. That means a night tramp for some of us. Too bad to be put to this sort of work within a week of sailing on foreign service," grumbled another. Various guesses were made as to the nature of the business, and several wagers were laid on the subject. In 10 minutes the adjutant returned. He was evidently excited, and all listened with great interest as, instead of resuming his seat, he remained standing. "Gentlemen," he said, "I have great news for you. A vessel has just come in from Plymouth with dispatches. Napoleon has escaped from Elba. He has landed in France and been received with enthusiasm. The troops have joined him, and he is already close to Paris, which he is expected to enter without opposition. The King of France has fled." For a moment there was silence. Then the major leaped to his feet. "Three cheers, gentlemen!" and all of those present joined in a hearty cheer. Then a sudden silence fell upon them. The first idea that had struck each man was that the news meant their again taking the field for another stirring campaign. Then the dismal thought occurred to them that the regiment was under orders for America. It soon found expression in words. "Why, Major, they surely won't be sending us across the Atlantic now this news has arrived. The powers will never permit all their work to be undone, and Napoleon to mount the throne of France again. Why, in a short time all Europe will be in a blaze, and how is England to take the field again? The great portion of Wellington's army is scattered over the world, in America, India, the colonies. I don't believe there are half a dozen of the old fighting regiments available, and even their ranks are half filled with raw recruits. Almost all the regiments at home are mere skeletons. Surely they'll never be sending us away at such a moment." "Well, that I can say nothing about," the adjutant replied. "Certainly no counter orders have reached the colonel as of this evening. I don't suppose anything will be decided upon for some time. The powers will all exchange notes and hold councils and spend weeks in talk before they make up their mind whether anything is to be done, and if so, what. Oh, and long before they come to any decision on the subject we shall be on the other side of the Atlantic, and then possibly, after all the trials and monotony of perhaps a 2-month voyage, we may land there only to be fetched back again. I quite agree with you that England can put nothing worth calling an army in the field, and that it would be madness to send a fine regiment out of the country at the present moment, but everyone knows the lack of wisdom with which we are governed, and the miserable slowness of our military authorities. It's not likely even to occur to anyone to countermand our orders, but it will certainly be disgusting in the extreme to have to start just at the present moment. Besides," another officer said, "it'll be maddening to be 2 months at sea without news, and to know that perhaps all Europe is in arms and tremendous events going on, and we out of it altogether." "I should think nothing will be done just at present," the major said. "Every country in Europe has been disbanding its armies just as we have since peace was proclaimed, and it will be a long time before any of them are ready to take the field in anything like force. Even Napoleon himself, great organizer as he is, will take some time to put all France under arms again. An army is a machine that cannot be created in a day. The soldiers have to be clothed, arms to be manufactured, the cavalry to be mounted, the artillery to be organized, and a field train put together. Now, I should say that at least 4 months must elapse before fighting begins in earnest. With anything like a favourable wind we should be across in America in a month. If orders are sent out a month after we start, we may be back in time for the opening ball. Judging from the past, it's likely to be a long business unseating Napoleon again, and if we are not in for the first of it, we may be in plenty of time for a fair share of the fighting, always supposing that the authorities are sufficiently awake to the merits of the regiment to recall us." "How is the wind this evening?" one of the officers asked. "And it was westerly when we came in," Lieutenant Desmond said. "Why do you ask?" "Why, as long as it blows from the west, there's not much chance of the transports getting in here." "Oh, that is so," the major agreed. "The question for us to consider, then, is whether we ought to pray for a fair wind or a foul. A fair wind will take us quickly across the Atlantic, and will give us a chance of getting back in time. A foul wind may possibly give them time to make up their minds at the Horse Guards, and to stop us before we start. It's a nice question." "There is no hope whatever, Major, that our government will make up their minds before the wind changes, not if it blew in one quarter longer than it has ever been known to do since the beginning of the world, especially as not only they but all the governments of Europe have to come to a decision." "Oh, if we had to wait for that it would be hopeless, but at the same time, as it must be evident to any individual of the meanest capacity that something or other for which troops will be required will have to be done, surely a month ought to be sufficient for the idea to occur to someone in authority that it would be as well not to be sending soldiers abroad until matters are finally settled." "Oh, I agree with you," the adjutant said. "Therefore I think we had best decide that our hopes and wishes shall be unanimous in favour of a continuance of westerly winds." Never were the weathercocks watched more anxiously than they were by the officers and men of the 28th for the next fortnight. The elements certainly appeared favourable to their wishes, and the wind blew steadily from the desired quarter, so that it was not until 10 days after they were expected that the two transports which were to convey the 28th to America dropped anchor in Cork Harbour. Captain O'Connor rejoined the regiment on the evening before the transports arrived. He walked with 2 sticks, but this was a measure of precaution rather than of necessity. "I feel like an impostor," he said, laughing, as he replied to the welcome of his comrades. "I believe I could safely throw away these sticks and dance a jig, but the doctor has laid his commands on me, and my man, who has been ruling me with a rod of iron, will not permit the slightest infringement of them. He seems to consider that he is responsible for me in all respects, and if he had been master and I man, he could not have behaved with grosser despotism." "I am glad to see you looking so well, O'Connor," Ralph said, shaking his captain warmly by the hand. "Well, I don't know whether I do right in shaking hands with you, Conway," O'Connor said. "I have been thinking it over while I have been lying there, and I have come to the conclusion that it's you I have to thank for this affair altogether." There was a general laugh. "Well, how do you make that out?" Ralph asked. "It's clear enough now my eyes are opened. It was you who discovered that passage, and when you did so you said at once to yourself, 'Now I will get O'Connor and Desmond to go down this place. They are safe to break their necks, and then I shall get all the honour and glory of the affair.' And so it came about. There were Desmond and I lying on the top of each other with the breath knocked clean out of our bodies, while you were doing all the fighting and getting the credit of the affair. I appeal to all friends here if it is not a most suspicious affair." There was a chorus of agreement. "We did not think it of you, Conway. A most disgraceful trick. Ought to be sent to Coventry. Ought to be drummed out of the regiment," mingled with shouts of laughter. "By the way, the trial of those fellows comes on next week," one of the officers said when the laughter subsided. "So if the transports don't come in you will be able to see the last of them, O'Connor." "I shall have no objection to see that red rascal hung, but as to the other poor devils I should be glad enough for them to get off. An Irish peasant sees no harm in making whisky, and it's only human nature to resist when you're attacked. Besides, it was the Red Captain's gang that set them to fighting, no doubt. If it hadn't been for them I don't suppose there would have been a shot fired. At least I hope that's the view the authorities take of it." As it turned out, this was the view taken by the prosecuting counsel at the trial. The Red Captain was tried for the murder of his officer and for the shooting of 2 constables in Galway, was found guilty, and hung. The others were put on trial together for armed resistance to His Majesty's forces, and for killing and slaying 3 soldiers. Their counsel pleaded that they were acting under the compulsion of the gang of desperadoes with them, that it was these and these only who had fired upon the soldiers as they ascended the rocks, and that the peasants themselves had no firearms. Indeed, it was proved that only 5 guns were found in the cave. He admitted that in their desperation at the last moment the men had defended themselves with pikes and bludgeons, but this, he urged, was but an effort of despair, and not with any premeditated idea of resisting the troops. He pointed out that, as all the soldiers had fallen by gunshot wounds, none of the prisoners at the bar had any hand in their death. The counsel for the Crown did not press for capital sentences. 2 of the men, who had before suffered terms of imprisonment for being concerned in running illicit stills, were sentenced to transportation. The others escaped with terms of imprisonment. Chapter 14. The New Housemaid. "What do you think of the new housemaid, Charlotte?" "As she's only been here 24 hours," Miss Penfold replied, "I don't think I can say anything about it, Eleanor. All servants behave decently for the first week or two, then their faults begin to come out. However, she seems quiet in her way of going about, and that is something. My room was carefully dusted this morning. These are the only 2 points on which I can at presently say anything." "I met her in the passage this morning," Eleanor Penfold said, "and it seemed to me that her face reminded me of someone. Did that strike you?" "Not at all," the eldest sister replied decidedly. "I am not given to fancies about such things. I saw no likeness to anyone, and if I had done so I should not have given it a second thought. The one point with us is whether the woman is clean, quiet, steady, and thoroughly up to her work. Her reference said she was all these things, and I hope she will prove so. She is older than I like servants to be, that is, when they first come to us. A young girl is teachable, but when a servant has once got into certain ways there is never any altering them. However, if she knows her work it does not matter, and there's one comfort. At her age she is less likely to be coming to us one day or other soon and saying that she wants to leave us to get married." The new servant, Anna, as she was called in the house, soon settled down to her duty. Miss Penfold allowed that she knew her work, and did it carefully. The servants did not quite understand the newcomer. She was pleasant and friendly, but somehow she was not, as one of them said, of their sort. This they put down partly to the fact that she had been in service in London, and was not accustomed to country ways. However, she was evidently obliging and quiet, and smoothed away any slight feeling of hostility with which the under housemaid was at first disposed to feel against her for coming in as a stranger over her head, by saying that as she had no acquaintances in the village she had no desire to go out, and that whenever her turn came to do so the other might take her place. As Jane was keeping company with the blacksmith's son, this concession greatly pleased her, and although at first she had been disappointed that she had not, on Martha's leaving, succeeded to her place, the fact that she was but 21 while the newcomer was a good many years her senior went far to reconcile her to being passed over. Mrs. Conway had not been 24 hours in the house before she discovered there was an obstacle in the way of her search that she had not foreseen. She had dusted the drawing-room and the dining-room, and then went to the door of the room which she supposed to be the library. She found it locked. At dinner she asked the other housemaid what the room opposite the dining-room was, and where was the key. "Oh, that was the master's library," the girl said. "Miss Penfold always keeps it locked, and no one's allowed to go in. It's just as he left it. At least Martha said so, for I have never been inside since. On the first day of each month it's opened and dusted. Miss Penfold always used to go in with Martha and stay there while she did the work. She said it was to see that nothing was moved, but Martha used to think there was another reason." "Oh, and what is that?" Mrs. Conway asked. Jane shook her head and glanced at the butler, as much as to say she did not care about speaking before him. But presently, when she had an opportunity of talking alone with the newcomer, Jane said, "I don't want to say anything before James. He holds with the Miss Penfolds. He only came a month or 2 before the master's death, and did not know much about him, and he will have it that they have been ill-treated, and that the lawyer and all of them ought to be punished for going on as if the Miss Penfolds had done something wrong about the will. Cook, she doesn't give no opinion, but Martha and me both thought they knew something about it, and were keeping Miss Withers and young Conway out of their rights. Oh, but I forgot that you were a stranger and didn't know nothing about the will." Then she told Mrs. Conway all about the will being missing, and how Mr. Tallboys, who had made it for Mr. Penfold, said that all the property had been left to Mabel Withers, who was the daughter of the clergyman and a great pet of the master's, and to a boy who had been staying there some months before, and whose name was Conway. "Well, Martha and me believed that they," and she nodded toward the drawing-room, "must know something about it, for Mr. Tallboys would have it that it was stowed away in some secret hiding place, and has been looking for it here, and pulling down the wainscoting and all sorts. And, of course, there was a secret hiding place. The Miss Penfolds would know of it as well as their brother. Martha used to think that the reason why the Miss Penfolds had the room shut up and would never let her go into it without one of them being there to look after her was that the hiding place was somewhere in the library, and that they were afraid that when she was dusting and doing up she might come upon the will. The same conclusion had flashed across Mrs. Conway's mind just as soon as she heard that the room was kept locked. "If the will is really hidden away," she said, "it's likely enough to be as you say, but I shouldn't think two ladies would do such a thing as that." "Oh, you don't know them," Jane said sharply. "They're two regular old cats, they are, and hunt one about all over the house, as if they thought one was going to steal something. They was fond of their brother in their way, but bless you, they treated him like a child, and he dasn't call his soul his own. And you may be sure they didn't like the thought that he had left his money away from them, and that someone else had become master and missus of the Hall while they were living. Martha and me was both of one mind that the old women were likely enough to do it if they had a chance. I'd give a good deal if I could find the will myself, just to see their faces, interfering old things. It was only 2 Sundays ago they told me after I came out at church that they didn't approve of the ribbons in my bonnet, just as if a girl was to go about as if she was a convict." "But you say there were men searching here, Jane. How was it they didn't find it if it's in the library, and how was it the Miss Penfolds allowed them to search?" "Oh, they couldn't help it," Jane replied. "There was an order from the court in London, or a judge or someone, and they couldn't stop it. They went away when the men came, and didn't come back till it was all over. I don't know how it was that they didn't find it in the library, for they searched it regular. I was in there 2 or 3 times while they were at work, and they took out all the books from the shelves and pulled down a lot of the woodwork and turned it all upside down. They couldn't find anything. Still, you see, it ain't a likely tale of theirs as they keeps the door locked because they want it to be just as he left it, when it's all been turned topsy-turvy and everything put out of its place. That's what Martha and me couldn't get over, though Martha told me they'd done their best to have it put just as it was, and there's paper and pens on the table just to pretend it's exactly as it used to be and that no one hadn't been in, as if they cared so much about him. I call it sickening, that's what I calls it. The Withers don't come here now. They used to be often here in the master's time, but they're not friends with him now. Last Sunday the parson, he made it hot for them and preached a sermon about secrets being known and undiscovered things coming to light. Of course, he didn't say nothing special about wills, but they felt it, I could see. Our pew's on the opposite side of the church, and I could see their faces. Miss Penfold, she got white and pinched up her lips, and if she could have given a piece of her mind to the parson, she would have done so. And Eleanor, she got red and looked as if she was going to cry. She's a lot better than her sister, she is, and if any wrong's been done, it's the old one what's done it, I'm sure that. And Martha always said so, too. I could put up with the younger one very well, but I can't abide Miss Penfold." "I'm quite anxious to see the room, Jane, after what you've been telling me about it." "Well, you can see it in about a week. It's always on the first of the month that it's done up, and you'll see the old woman will go in with you and watch you all the time like a cat watches a mouse. Martha used to say so, but there, as you're not from this part of the country, she won't think as you know nothing about the will or care nothing about it. She probably won't keep such a sharp lookout after you as she did with Martha." Upon the following Sunday, Mrs. Withers, on the way home from church, asked her husband with some anxiety whether he was not well. "I noticed you were quite pale in church, James, and you lost your place once or twice, and seemed as if you really weren't attending to what you were doing." "Then I'm afraid, my dear, I seemed what I was, for I was tremendously surprised, and though I tried hard to keep my thoughts from wandering, I am afraid I succeeded very badly." "Surprised, James? What was it?" "Well, I will tell you, my dear. You know that letter we had a fortnight ago from Mrs. Conway, and that we puzzled over it a good deal. After talking as usual about her being determined to find the will and set matters straight, she said that we might possibly see her before long, and begged us not to show any surprise or to seem to recognize her. Well, you know, we talked it over and could make nothing of it. Now I know what she means." "What, did you see her in church today, James?" "I did, Amy, and where do you think she was?" "Oh, I can't guess, James. Why, where could she be, and where can she be staying if not with us? I didn't see her. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" "She was sitting behind you, Amy, which will account for your not seeing her. She was sitting in the Penfolds' servants' pew, in a plain straw bonnet and quiet clothes like the others." "Among the Penfolds' servants, James? Are you dreaming?" Not at all, my dear. There she was, sure enough. I could not possibly be mistaken. Mrs. Withers was silent for some time with surprise. But what could she be doing there, James? Do you mean to say that you think that she has really gone to service at the Hall? Well, that's what I do think, the clergyman replied. You know how she said over and over again that she was determined somehow to find the will. Well, I believe that she has in some way, in pursuance of that purpose, gone as a servant to the Penfolds. Now, my dear, you will not be surprised that I found it somewhat difficult to keep my thoughts from wandering. No, indeed, James. I am sure that if I had been in your place I should have stopped altogether. Well, if that's so, it explains what she said in her letter about our not recognizing her. But how could she do such a thing, and what will come of it? Oh, I have no idea how she managed to get there, Amy, but certainly she must have managed very cleverly somehow. What she is there to do is clear enough. She's going to search herself for the will. Whether she'll ever find it or not is another matter, but I can hardly believe she can succeed after the thorough search Tallboys said he made of the house. Still, that's what she means. I have not a shadow of a doubt about it. I should never have thought for a moment she was the sort of woman to undertake such a thing, Mrs. Withers said. Why, she'll have to do servant's work and to run all sorts of risks of being found out. And then I don't know what they mightn't do to her. Oh, I don't see that they could do much, my dear, unless perhaps they prosecuted her for obtaining the place with a false character, which I suppose she must have done. Still, it required no ordinary pluck for a woman to undertake such a scheme, and it will require patience and nerve to carry it through. But I don't know that I agree with you that she is not the sort of woman I should have thought capable of undertaking such a business. She was quiet enough when we met her in the town, but I believe from what I have heard that she was a high-spirited girl, and when we saw her, you know, she was on the eve of parting with her son. As she was evidently wrapped up in him, that would of course made her more quiet and silent than usual. I thought she bore up remarkably well, and admired the effort she made to prevent any display of her feeling marring the pleasant time we were having in London. But how about Mabel, James? Had we better tell her about this? You see, if she happens to meet Mrs. Conway, she might betray her secret, might run up and address her by her name. That is certainly a difficulty, my dear, and I don't quite know what to do about it. What do you think yourself? Well, I think we had better postpone the matter, James, by sending Mabel away for a bit. You know, my sister has asked her several times to go and stay with her on a visit at Bath. We have never cared to let her go away from us, but I do think now it will be a good thing for me to write to Harriet and tell her that if it will be convenient for her to take Mabel, we shall be glad to send her to her for a few months in order that she may take lessons in French and music. There are, of course, plenty of good masters there. In that way we shall get rid of the necessity for speaking to Mabel about it at all, and I should think it likely that Mrs. Conway would have left the Hall long before she returns. Perhaps she will, my dear, though I would not count upon that too much. I imagine that as Mrs. Conway has had nerve and courage enough to propose and so far carry out this singular plan of hers, she will have resolution enough to continue to play her part till she either finds the will or becomes thoroughly convinced that it is absolutely not to be found. And so Mrs. Withers wrote to her sister, and 10 days later Mr. Withers started with Mabel for Bath. Mrs. Conway had some difficulty in restraining all show of excitement, and in assuming a passive and indifferent air, as upon the first of the month Miss Penfold unlocked the door of the library and led the way into the room. "This is my brother's library. You will understand, Anna, that I wish everything to remain exactly as it is. You will therefore be careful to place everything as you find it, each article of furniture and the books and papers on the table. You will just sweep the floor and dust everything. Beyond that we wish nothing done to the room." Mrs. Conway began her work quietly. Miss Penfold watched her for some little time, and then said, "You will leave the door open, Anna. It is better to let the air circulate as much as possible. When the weather gets warmer you will leave the windows open while you are at work, but the air is too damp at present." "Would you like me to light a fire to air the room, Miss Penfold?" "Oh, certainly not," Miss Penfold said decidedly. "There is no occasion whatever for it. If I have not returned by the time you have finished the room, come and tell me when you have done. I always make a point of locking the door myself." So saying, Miss Penfold went out, leaving the door wide open behind her. "Have you left her alone there?" Eleanor asked her sister as she entered the sitting-room. "Certainly I have," Miss Penfold said coldly. "I do wish you would not be so nervous, Eleanor. The woman can have no interest in this matter. She may have heard of it from the other servants, but it can be nothing to her. You know as well as I do that there is no chance of her stumbling upon it by accident. It was different with the last girl. Of course, they were always talking about the will, and she might have tried as a matter of curiosity to find it, or she might have been bribed by those Withers or by that man Tallboys. But it's different now. This woman can have no interest in it, and will only want to get her work done as soon as possible. My being always in the room with her, as I was with Martha, might excite comment. I should never have done it in Martha's case, but if you had not been so absurdly nervous. For you know very well there is no real danger of her ever finding the place, however closely she looked for it. But now there's a change, it's quite time to drop it, or a rumour will be getting about that we are afraid of any of our servants remaining for a moment alone in the library." "Oh, I wish we had never done it. I do wish we had never done it," Eleanor murmured pitifully. "I am ashamed of you, Eleanor," Miss Penfold said coldly. "You are worse than a child with your laments and complainings. What have we done? Nothing. We have no certainty that there is a will in existence, and if we had, it's not our business to assist to carry out a monstrous wrong against ourselves, and to put that woman's son as master here. How many times have we talked this over, and it's always the same. You keep on trembling at shadows." "I should not care if it was not for the night, Charlotte. I'm always dreaming that Herbert is coming to my bedside and looking so stern and angry and saying, 'Let justice be done.'" "Bah!" Miss Penfold said contemptuously. "You must eat less supper, Eleanor. If you were not such a coward you would not dream such things. I have no patience with your folly." "Oh, I know it is foolish, Charlotte, but I can't help it. My nerves were never as strong as yours. I quite agree with you from the first about it. I think it was infamous that Herbert should have passed us over, and that it is not to be expected we should aid in the discovery of such a wicked will. Still, I can't help being unhappy about it, and lying awake at night and dreaming. No one can help their dreams." "Your dreams are a mere repetition of your thoughts," Miss Penfold said scornfully. "If you worry while you're awake, you will worry while you're asleep. We have done nothing criminal. We have meddled with no will, nor hidden one. We simply refuse to aid in the discovery of an unjust document, and by so doing prevent a great wrong being done to ourselves. To my mind the thing is perfectly simple, and my conscience wholly acquits me of any wrongdoing." Left to herself, Mrs. Conway took an earnest look round the room. Somewhere, no doubt within its limits, lay the key to the secret that would give wealth to Ralph. Now, where was it? The walls were completely covered by bookshelves. These were handsomely carved and dark with age. One of the Penfolds had evidently been a bookworm, and had spared no pains and expense in carrying out his hobby. The housemaid had said that all the books had been removed, and that nothing had been found behind them. Still, there might well be some spring that had escaped their attention. At any rate, the ground must be gone over again. Then the spring might lie among the carved work of the bookcases themselves. This must be gone over inch by inch. That was evidently the first work to be done. The mantel and its supports were of richly carved woodwork. These too must be searched. In the first place, however, she had to carry out her work, and laying aside determinedly all thought of the missing will, she began to dust and sweep. At the end of an hour, when she happened to turn around, she saw Miss Penfold standing in the doorway. She had not heard her footstep, and at once decided in her mind that it would be necessary to be extremely careful in her search, as at any moment Miss Penfold might look in upon her without warning. "Have you nearly finished, Anna?" Miss Penfold asked. "It will take me another hour at least to dust the woodwork properly, Miss Penfold. I've done the carpet and the furniture." Miss Penfold made no remark, but went away again. "She is not likely to come back for a few minutes," Miss Conway said to herself. "I think I can safely carry out one of my plans." She took from her pocket a ball of thin string, one end of which was attached to a tiny brad awl. Going into one corner of the room, she fixed the brad awl into the woodwork, then unwinding the ball, proceeded to the other end of the room, straining the string tightly, and tied a knot to mark the length. Then she went back and crossed the room and again made a knot to mark the width. Then she hastily gathered up the string, pulled the brad awl from the woodwork, and put them in her pocket. While she had been carrying this out, she retained a duster in one hand, and dusted the woodwork as she moved along, trusting that if Miss Penfold should look in, the string, which was of a dark colour, would be unnoticed by her. However, she gave a sigh of relief when the operation was complete and the string and brad awl hidden away. She then continued her work until, in about 3/4 of an hour, Miss Penfold again appeared. "Oh, I think that will do very well, Ella. It's quite impossible to get all the dust out of the carving. It would take you all day to go over it, and you would need steps for the upper part. That need only be done occasionally." She gave an approving glance round as she noticed that the new housemaid had carefully placed every article in the exact place in which she had found it. Mrs. Conway gathered up the brooms and dusters and left the room, Miss Penfold carefully locking the door after her. "Well, that is something done," Mrs. Conway said to herself, "and will, I think, save me an immense deal of trouble. Tomorrow I'll measure the rooms next to it. The passage runs along the side, and it's hardly possible that there can be any receptacle there. The wall is not thick enough for a place of any size. It must be at one end or the other, or else under the floor." The following morning she measured the dining room and what was now known as the housekeeper's room, but which in years gone by had been called the still room, and the following day slipped out of doors as soon as she came downstairs, and took the outside measurement of the side of the house, marking on the string the position and width of each window. She had only now to make a plan and compare the figures. She found that between the back of the bookcase, for she had taken out a few books to ascertain its depth, and the panel of the dining room, there was a thickness of 2 feet, but between the library and the housekeeper's room there were fully 5 feet unaccounted for. In both were deep old-fashioned fireplaces back to back, and even allowing but 6 inches between these, the depth there would be accounted for, but on either side of the fireplaces there would be a wide space. There were certainly no cupboards visible in the library, for the bookcases extended from the fireplace to the wall on each side. In the housekeeper's room there were cupboards on each side of the chimney-piece, but these were shallow, not being above 9 inches in depth. Therefore behind these there was a considerable space unaccounted for. It was evident to Mrs. Conway that her first search must lie in this direction. Here might lie 2 chambers, each 3 feet wide by 8 feet long. Mrs. Conway's spirits rose at this discovery, and she sighed impatiently at the thought that another month must elapse before she could even commence the search. Brooding over the matter continually, there was one point that did not escape her. These old hiding-places were made either to conceal proscribed priests or hunted fugitives, and were constructed with the greatest care. As she had so easily discovered the spot where a hidden room might be situated, it would be discovered with the same ease by those who were on the search for fugitives, and who would naturally be well acquainted with the positions where hiding-places would likely be situated. The moment they looked into the cupboard, its shallowness would suggest to them that there must be a wide empty space behind it, and by setting to work with axes, picks, and crowbars, they would soon discover by force the secret she was trying to penetrate by stratagem. This reflection considerably damped her hopes, but she thought that possibly from this easily discoverable hiding-place there might be some access, much more difficult to trace, to another lying below. At any rate, she determined that if she did find the secret entrance to these little rooms, and found they were empty, she would not be disheartened, but would search further until she found either some secret closet where the will might be placed, or an entrance to some perhaps larger hiding-place below. Her subsequent search outside showed her that there existed several small iron gratings about 6 inches long and 3 deep, close down to the soil of the border. No doubt these were intended to give ventilation underneath the floors, which were some 2 feet above the outside level, but one of them might also afford ventilation to an underground chamber. 3 months passed, and on the occasion of each of her visits to the room she devoted some time to the examination of the carved woodwork round the fireplace, and that of the bookcases, but without making any discovery whatever, and it became evident to her that a far closer search would be needed than the short and hasty examination that was all she had dared to make, with the possibility that at any moment Miss Penfold might appear at the door. Accordingly she wrote to Mr. Talboys and told him that it would be necessary for her to obtain a cake of very soft wax, 4 inches long and 2 inches wide, and asked him to procure it for her, and to send it in a wooden box to her by the carrier's cart that once a week journeyed from Weymouth to the villages in the neighbourhood of the Hall. 10 days later she received the wax, and the next time the day for cleaning the library arrived, she quietly withdrew the key from the door as soon as Miss Penfold had left her, laid it on the wax, and pressed it steadily until a deep impression was made upon its surface. Then she carefully examined the key to see that no particle of wax had stuck between the wards, replaced it in the door, closed the lid of the little box in which the wax lay, and put it in her pocket, and then set to work cleaning. Upon this occasion she spent no time in trying to find the spring. There was danger now, as always, of Miss Penfold's coming, and as she would soon have the means of entering the room at her will, she would run no risk. A few days later she asked for a day to go to Weymouth to purchase some things of which she had need, and when there she called upon Mr. Talboys. "How are you, Mrs. Conway?" the lawyer said when the door had closed behind her. "Have you come to tell me that you have given up the search as hopeless?" "Oh, not at all," she replied with decision. "I told you in my letter that I had discovered the probable position of the hiding place, and told you the difficulties there were in making a thorough search of it, owing to the room being always kept locked. I have come now to ask you to get a key made from this," and she produced the wax. "It would be suspicious if I were to go to a locksmith here and ask for such a thing. He would think at once that I was a servant who wanted to rob my mistress. But of course it will be different with you. Besides, I thought that if you did not like to get it done here, you might send the wax up to London and get the key made there." "This is becoming more and more serious, Mrs. Conway," Mr. Talboys said gravely. "Nothing very terrible could happen to you beyond being turned out of the house, even were it discovered who you really are. But if you were found at night, and I suppose your intention is to work at night, in the library with a false key in your possession, you might be arrested for an attempt at theft, and could only clear yourself by explaining before the magistrates who you were and with what motive you were acting, which would give rise to much unpleasant talk, and would render any pursuance of your plan impossible, and might not improbably induce these women to destroy the will, if they have not already done so." "Oh, I am quite convinced that they have not done that, Mr. Talboys. The anxiety they have about anyone entering the room, and the manner in which Miss Penfold pops in occasionally to see what I am doing, is quite proof in my mind that the will is still in existence. For if they had destroyed it, they would have no further anxiety on the subject. No, I've thought it all over, and must run the risk. There is no other way of making a complete search, and in one night there by myself I could do far more than a 12-month's visit as at present. There are 2 or 3 more things I wish you would procure for me. I want a man's coat and cap, rough ones, such as a burglar might wear. You see, if by chance I am met by those women going downstairs, or returning to my room, I must give them a start. Dressed up like that, and with a piece of crape over my face, I should be taken for a burglar. I don't think Miss Penfold is very easily frightened, but at the same time I fancy I might alarm her into returning to her room, and should be able to get back to mine before the house was roused. I shall always unfasten a window on the ground floor and lift it a little, so that it would be supposed that the intruder entered and escaped that way." Mr. Talboys smiled a little bit, said, "It's a very risky business, Mrs. Conway. Miss Penfold is just the sort of woman to keep pistols in her bedroom." "One must risk something when one is fighting for a fortune," Mrs. Conway said quietly. "I hope that I shall not be heard. There are always creakings and noises in an old house like that. The doors are thick and well fitting, and there is little chance of my footsteps being heard. It's only by an accident, such as one of them being unable to sleep and getting up and walking over the house, that they are likely to run against me, and it's not probable she would have a pistol in her hand then. No, I do not think there is the least fear of anything of that sort. The only fear I have is of being detected in some other way before I have done what I have to do, and the risk of that grows less and less every day. I've been there over 4 months now, and am perfectly at home. I was at first afraid of a sudden meeting with Mr. Withers or his wife or Mabel, but that has passed away now. I saw he recognized me the first Sunday in church, and I wrote to him, of course sending the letter to Dover to be sent back from here. He answered me praying me to give up what he called my mad-brained attempt, and saying it made him and his wife quite unhappy to think of my being at the Hall. He told me that at present they had not told Mabel that I was there, but had sent her away to school at Bath. She's with an aunt, and will probably not be home again for some months, so I am safe from her. No, I'm not in the least anxious about myself. I cannot say as much about Ralph. His regiment has just gone out to Belgium, and I suppose there will be fighting presently. I think of that more now than I do of this will, Mr. Talboys. If I had known what was coming, I would not have begun this search until it was all over. What use would it be for me to find the will if anything happened to him? It's clearly of no use my trying to dissuade you from carrying out your plans, Mrs. Conway, and although I cannot altogether approve of them, I will do my best to help you as far as lies in my power, and you shall have the key down very shortly. How shall I send it over?" I have ordered a dress and some other things at Wilson's in the High Street. The dress has to be made up, and will not be ready for a week. I have told them there will be 3 or 4 other parcels, which they are to put in the box and send it on by the carrier. I have ordered a pair of boots to be made for me, and 1 or 2 other things, and told them not to close the box until this day fortnight, by which time all the other things I have ordered will be sent in to them. I hope you will have got the key before that. Oh, yes, I should think it would be done in a week at the latest. You certainly deserve success, Mrs. Conway, for you seem to provide for every contingency. Chapter 15. In Belgium. There was a general feeling of depression in the regiment when it was known that the transport had arrived in harbour. As a rule, regiments embarking for service abroad start in high spirit, and whatever private regrets are felt at parting from friends, the troops marched gaily down to the point of embarkation. But this was not the case, as the 28th, with the band at its head playing "The Girl I Left Behind Me," passed through the streets of Cork on its march down to the spot 10 miles away where the transports were lying. There was not one, from the colonel down to the youngest drummer boy, but felt that he had been deprived of the chance of taking part in a stirring campaign, and that he was going into a sort of exile. The baggage had been sent on the previous day, and the regiment, on arriving at the harbour, was speedily transferred in large lighters to the 2 transports. "Well, they are fine ships, anyway," Captain O'Connor said to Ralph, as the barge carrying his company approached the side of one of them. "Rather different craft to that in which we made our last voyage together. We shall have comfortable quarters on board her, and ought to make a pleasant passage if we have but decent weather." "Yes, if anything could make our voyage pleasant under the circumstances," Ralph replied dismally. "Oh, it's no use thinking any more about that," O'Connor said cheerfully. "We must make the best of matters, and hope that we shall soon be on our way back again. If not, I dare say we shall have a pleasant time in Canada. With your knowledge of French, Conway, you will make a great hit among the fair Canadians." "Oh, I didn't think of that," Ralph laughed. "Yes, the prospect is a cheering one. I promise you, O'Connor, that I will do the best I can for you. Well, here we are alongside." "Good afternoon, Captain. When are we going to sail?" O'Connor asked the master of the vessel as he stepped on deck. "You must ask the clerk of the weather," the skipper replied. "At present there is not a breath of wind stirring, and from the look of the sky I see no chance of a change at present." Day after day passed, and still the vessels remained at anchor. Not a breath of wind stirred the water, and the troops had nothing to do but to lounge idly about the decks and whistle for a breeze. Whenever a vessel came in from England, boats were lowered and rowed alongside to get the latest news. This was little enough. It was, however, known that all the powers had determined to refuse to recognize Napoleon as Emperor of France, and that a great coalition against him was being arranged. There were rumours that Belgium was likely to be the scene of operations. Already, by the terms of the late treaty, several English regiments were stationed on the Belgian border, and 3 or 4 more were already under orders to embark for that country. It was reported that Russia, Austria, and Prussia were taking steps to arm. The militia had been called out at home, and high bounties were offered for volunteers from these regiments into the line. Recruiting was going on vigorously all over the country. Horses were being bought up, and efforts made to place the attenuated regiments on a war footing. All this was tantalizing news to the 28th. The colonel was known to have written to influential friends in London, begging them to urge upon the authorities the folly of allowing a fine regiment like his to leave the country at such a moment. But little was hoped from this, for at any moment a change in the weather might place them beyond the possibility of a recall. 3 weeks passed, and then the barometer fell, and there were signs of a change. There was bustle and movement on board the ships, and even the soldiers were glad that the monotony of their imprisonment on board was about to come to an end, and their voyage to commence. The sails were loosed from their gaskets, and the sounds of the drum and fifes struck up as the capstans were manned, and the soldiers lending a hand at the bars, and the chains came clanking in at the hawse holes. "There's a vessel coming in round the point," O'Connor said, "but we shall hardly get the last news. We shall be under way before she anchors." "She's signalling to the fort on the hill," Ralph said, as he watched the flags run up on the signal staff on the summit of Spike Island, "and they are answering down below there at the station in front of the commandant's house." A moment later a gun was fired. "That's to call our attention, I think," the skipper said, taking up his glass and directing it to the shore. "Yes, there's our number flying. Get the signal book, boy. Mr. Smith, run up the answering pennant." As soon as this ascended, the flags on shore were lowered, and a fresh set ran up. 3, 5, 0, 4. "Give me the book." "The vessels are not to sail until further orders," he read aloud. "Hooray, lads!" Captain O'Connor shouted at the top of his voice. "We're stopped until further orders." A loud cheer broke from the troops, which was echoed by a roar from the other vessel, and for a few minutes the greatest excitement reigned. The men threw their caps into the air and shouted until they were hoarse. The officers shook each other by the hand, and all were frantic with delight at the narrow escape they had had. As soon as the brig had dropped anchor, boats rowed off to her, but nothing further was learned. Just as she was leaving Plymouth, an officer had come on board with dispatches and instructions to the captain to signal immediately he arrived at Cork that if the 28th had not already sailed they were to be stopped. Owing to the lightness of the wind, the brig had been 8 days on her passage from Plymouth. For another fortnight the regiment remained on board ship. The imprisonment was borne more patiently, now they felt sure they were not at any rate to be sent across the Atlantic. Then a vessel arrived with orders that the 28th were at once to proceed to Ostend, and 2 hours afterward the transports set sail. Belgium was hardly the spot which the troops in general would have approved of as the scene of operations, for the disastrous expedition to Walcheren was still fresh in men's minds. They would, moreover, have preferred a campaign in which they would have fought without being compelled to act with a foreign army, and would have had all the honour and glory to themselves. Still, Belgium recalled the triumphs of Marlborough, and although every mail brought news of the tremendous efforts Napoleon was making to reorganize the fighting power of France, and of the manner in which the veterans of his former wars were responding to the call, there was not a doubt of success in the minds of the 28th, from the colonel down to the youngest drummer boy. Ralph was sorry that he had not been able to pay a flying visit to his mother before his departure on active and dangerous service. He had been somewhat puzzled by her letters ever since he had been away. They had been almost entirely devoted to his doings, and had said very little about herself beyond the fact that she was in excellent health. She had answered his questions as to his various friends and acquaintances in Dover, but these references had been short, and she had said nothing about the details of her daily life, the visits she paid, and the coming in of old friends to see her. She had evidently been staying a good deal, he thought, with the Withers, and she kept him fully informed about them, although she did not mention when she went there or when she had returned. She frequently spoke about the missing will, and of her hopes it would some day be recovered, and had mentioned that the search for it was still being maintained, and that she felt confident that sooner or later it would come to light. But even as to this she gave no specific details, and he felt that, even apart from his desire to see his mother, he should greatly enjoy a long talk with her to find out everything that had been going on during his absence. Mrs. Conway had indeed abstained from giving her son the slightest inkling of the work upon which she was engaged, for she was sure he would be altogether opposed to her plan, and would be greatly disturbed and grieved at the thought of her being in any menial position. Whether, if when he returned and she had not attained the object of her search, she would let him know what she was doing, she had not decided, but she was determined that, at any rate, until he came home on leave, he should know nothing about it. "So we're going to fight Boney at last, Mr. Conway," Ralph's servant said to him. "We've never had that luck before. He's always sent his generals against us, but by Jabbers he'll find that he's not got Roosians and Prussians this time." "It'll be hot work, Dennis, for we shall have the best troops of France against us, and Napoleon himself in command." "It's a little weak here for the French, your honour. Didn't we beat 'em in Spain and bait 'em? Sure, they're hardly worth counting." "You'll find them fight very much better now that they have their emperor with them. You know, Wellington had all his work to beat them." "Yes, but he did beat them, your honour." "That's true enough, Dennis, but his troops now are old soldiers, most of whom have been fighting for years, while a great part of our force will be no better than militia." "They won't fight any worse for that, your honour," Dennis said confidently. "We'll beat them whenever we meet them. You'll see if we don't." "We'll certainly try anyhow, Dennis, and if all the regiments were as good as our own I should feel very sure about it. I wish, though, that we were going to fight by ourselves. We know what we can do, but we do not know how the Belgians and Dutch and Germans who will be with us can be depended upon." "The way with the Duke, I wouldn't depend on him at all, your honour. I'll just put 'em all in the rear and leave our fellows to do the work. They're miserable half-starved creatures, all of them foreigners, they tells me, and if a man's not fed, sure he can't expect him to fight. I couldn't do it myself. And I hope the Duke ain't going to put us on short rations, because it'd be murder entirely on the boys to make 'em fight with empty stomachs." "I fancy we shall be all right as to that, Dennis. I expect we shall wait quiet till the French attack us, and waiting quiet means getting plenty of food." "And decent food, I hope, your honour. Not the sort of thing they say them foreigners lives on. Dennis Mulligan could live on frogs and snails as well as another, no doubt, but it'd go sorely against me, your honour." "I don't think there's much chance of your having to live on that, Dennis. You'll get rations there just the same as you did in Spain." "What, beef and mutton, your honour? I suppose they'll bring them across from England?" "Oh, they may bring some across, Dennis, but I suppose they'll be able to buy plenty for the supply of the army out here." "What, have they got cattle and sheep there, your honour?" Dennis asked incredulously. "Well, of course they have, Dennis, just the same as we have." "The heavens!" Dennis exclaimed. "To think that men who can get beef and mutton should feed upon such creatures as snails and such like. It's downright flying in the face of Providence, your honour." "Nonsense, Dennis. They eat beef and mutton just the same as we do. As to the frogs and snails, these are expensive luxuries, just as game is with us. There's nothing more nasty about snails, after all, than there is about oysters. And as to frogs, they were regarded as great dainties by the Romans, who certainly knew what good eating was." "Sure, I'm a Roman myself, your honour. So are most of the men of the regiment, but I never heard tell of such a thing." "Not that sort of Roman, Dennis," Ralph laughed. "The old Romans, people who lived long before there were any popes, a people who could fight as well as any that ever lived, and who were as fond of good living as they were of fighting." "Well, your honour, there's no accounting for tastes. There was Bridget Maloney, whom I courted before I entered the regiment. Well, your honour, if you'd believe it, she threw over a decent boy like me and married a little umdurman of a man about 5 feet high, and with one shoulder higher than the other. That's why I took to soldiering, your honour. No, there's no accounting for tastes, anyhow. Well, there's the mess bugle, your honour. Next time we hear it, it'll be at say, and maybe there won't be many ready to attend to it." Dennis's prediction was verified. The vessel sailed at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and by 6 was rolling heavily, and a brisk wind was blowing. The 28th had not long before made the voyage from the south of France, but they had been favoured by exceptionally fine weather, and had experienced nothing like the tossing they were now undergoing. The consequence was that only about half a dozen officers obeyed the bugle call to mess. There was a general feeling of satisfaction, though, when the low coast round Ostend was sighted, for the voyage throughout had been a rough one. Under certain circumstances a sea voyage is delightful, but confinement in a crowded transport in rough weather is the reverse of a pleasant experience. The space below decks was too small to accommodate the whole of the troops, and a third of their number had to be constantly on deck, and this for a 10 days' voyage in a heavy sea, with occasional rain showers, is not under ordinary circumstances calculated to raise the spirits of troops. But men bound on active and dangerous service are always in the highest spirits, and make light of disagreeables and hardships of all kinds. They had expected to find Ostend full of troops, for several regiments had landed before them, but they soon found that they were to be marched inland. As soon as the regiment had landed, they marched to a spot where a standing camp had been erected for the use of troops on their passage through. Their baggage was at once sent forward, and the men had therefore nothing to do but to clean up their arms and accoutrements, and to wander as they pleased through the town. They started early next morning, and after 2 days' march arrived at Ghent, where several regiments were quartered, either in the town itself or in the villages round it. Ralph's company had billets allotted to them in a village a mile from the town, the cottage being placed at the disposal of the captain and his 2 subalterns. The next morning, after the parade of the regiment was over, most of the officers and many of the men paid a visit to the town, where the fugitive King of France had now established his court. Ralph, who years before had read the story of Ghent, was greatly interested in the quaint old town, though it was difficult to imagine, from the appearance of its quiet streets, that its inhabitants had once been the most turbulent in Europe. Here Van Artevelde was killed, and the streets often ran with the blood of contending factions. Was it possible that the fathers of these quiet workmen in blouses, armed with axes and pikes, had defeated the chivalry of France, and all but annihilated the force of the Duke of Anjou? What a number of convents there were! The monks seemed a full third of the population, and it was curious to hear everyone talking in French, when the French were the enemy that they were going to meet. The populace were quite as interested in their English visitors as the latter were with them. The English scarlet was altogether strange to them, and the dress of the men of the Highland regiment, who were in camp next to the 28th, filled them with astonishment. For a fortnight the regiment remained at Ghent, and then they, with some others of the same division, marched to Brussels and took up their quarters in villages round that town. The 28th belonged to Picton's division, which formed part of the reserve concentrated round Brussels. The 1st Army Corps, consisting of the 2nd and 3rd Divisions of Dutch and Belgians, and the 1st and 3rd of the British, extended from Enghien unto the right to Quatre Bras on the left. The 1st British Division were at the former town, the 3rd between Soignies and Rueil, while the Belgians and Dutch lay between Nivelles and Quatre Bras. The 2nd Army Corps held the ground on the right of the 1st, and extended to Oudenarde on the Schelde. The cavalry, with the exception of the Brunswick Brigade, were posted at Grammont, Mons, and Reille, their outposts being thrown forward as far as Maubeuge and Beaumont. The Prussians were on the left of Wellington's force, and extended from Ligny through Namur toward Liège, their advanced posts being at Charleroi, where Zieten's division had their headquarters. But although the allied armies thus formed together the arc of a large circle covering Brussels, they were entirely distinct. The British drew their supplies from Ostend on the right of their position, while Liège on the extreme left was the base of the Prussians. Napoleon's movements were uncertain. He might either advance upon Namur and cut off the Prussians from their base, or between Grammont and Oudenarde, by which measure he would similarly cut the British off from Ostend, or he might advance from Charleroi direct upon Brussels, breaking through at the point where the Wellington's left joined the Prussian right. The Duke of Wellington believed that he would attend the second of these alternatives, as in that case he would fall upon the British before the Prussians could come up to their assistance, and if successful would not only cut them off from the base of supplies, but would be able to march straight upon Brussels. It was to defeat this plan that the Duke posted the largest portion of his British troops along the frontier, holding, however, 2 British divisions and the Brunswick and Nassau troops in and round Brussels, where they were nearly equidistant from any point that could be attacked, and could be moved forward as soon as the enemy's intentions became manifest. By the time that the whole of the forces were assembled, Wellington had 90,000 men under his orders. Blücher, the Prussian general, had 116,000, while Napoleon had 125,000 with which to encounter this vastly superior force. Upon the other hand, Napoleon's were all veteran troops, and the French had for a long time been accustomed to victory over the Prussians. Of Wellington's force fully half were of mixed nationalities, Belgians, Dutch, Brunswickers, and Hessians, while his British division consisted chiefly of young troops, so hastily raised that a great number of them absolutely fought at Waterloo in the uniforms of the militia regiments from which they had been drafted. It seemed, however, a well-nigh desperate enterprise for Napoleon to attack so greatly superior a force, but he had in fact no choice but to do so, for Russia and Austria were arming, and their forces would soon be advancing upon France, and it was therefore necessary, if possible, to defeat the British and Prussians before they could arrive. Could he succeed in doing this, the enthusiasm that would be excited in France would enable him vastly to increase his army. In the meantime, his confidence in his own military genius was unbounded, and the history of his past was contained many triumphs won under circumstances far less favourable than the present. During the weeks that elapsed while the 3 great armies were assembling and taking up their positions, the troops stationed round Brussels had a pleasant time of it. The city itself was crowded with visitors. Here were a number of the wives and friends of the officers of the various armies. Here were many of the French nobility, who had abandoned France upon the landing of Napoleon. Here were numbers of people attracted by curiosity, or the desire of being present at the theatre of great events, together with a crowd of simple pleasure seekers. For Europe had for many years been closed to Englishmen, and as soon as peace had been proclaimed, great numbers had crossed the Channel to visit Paris, and had travelled in Germany, Italy, and, of course, to Switzerland. The news of Napoleon's return to France had occasioned a great scare among the tourists. A very few days sufficed for the desertion of Paris and other French towns, and so great was the crowd that the packet boats between Calais and Dover were insufficient to carry them. Many of the visitors to Paris, instead of leaving for England, made for Belgium, and were joined there by travellers hurrying back from Austria, Germany, and other parts of Europe, for none could say what course the events that would follow Napoleon's return from Elba might take. At Brussels, however, they felt safe. The distance to England was short, and they could, if necessary, leave at any time. Besides, between Belgium and France, 12,000 British troops had been stationed in the strong places, in accordance with the terms of the Treaty of Fontainebleau and an agreement made with her allies after the fall of Napoleon. The streets of Brussels were ablaze with bright colours. Staff officers in the uniforms of a number of nationalities dashed through the streets, followed by their orderlies. Now and then 2 or 3 general officers, riding at a slower pace and engaged in earnest talk, passed along, while the pavements were occupied by crowds of men and officers in all the varieties of British, Dutch, Belgian, Brunswick, Hanoverian, Hessian, and Prussian uniforms. Although Belgium had cast her lot with the Allies, the people were by no means unanimous in their sympathies, and indeed the majority, from their similarity both in religion and tongue to the French, sympathized with them rather than with the Allies, who were for the most part both Protestants and foreigners. Those who entertained these sentiments, however, kept them to themselves, while the rest fraternized to the best of their power with the troops, many of whom were quartered in the town. As for amusements, there were for the officers the theatres and an opera, while many of the ladies staying in Brussels kept almost open houses. Races and athletic sports were got up for the men. The weather at the latter end of May and during the early days of June was delightful, and although all knew that the storm might at any moment burst, it was difficult to believe, while so enjoying themselves, that tomorrow they might be called upon to meet the enemy in deadly conflict. Even Dennis Mulligan had nothing to complain about in his rations, and allowed to Ralph that the Belgians were much more decent people than he had expected to find them. The months of April and May had passed quietly on the frontier. The cavalry of the allied army on one side and the French mounted gendarmerie on the other maintained a vigilant watch over each other's movements, and each endeavoured to prevent the passing out of persons who might carry news of the intentions and position of their armies. But the line was far too long to be strictly watched, and French loyalists on the one side and Belgian sympathizers with France on the other managed to pass with sufficient regularity to keep the generals informed of the movements of their opponents. Wellington then was perfectly aware of the gathering of Napoleon's forces upon the other side of the frontier, but they, like his own troops, were scattered over a long front, and yet there was no indication whatever as to the point where Napoleon was likely to break through. During the past 3 months large bodies of men had laboured to restore the ruined fortifications of the frontier towns. The moats had been cleared out and deepened, the walls repaired, and the sluices restored, so that in case of necessity a wide tract of country could be laid under water. These precautions had been especially taken on the right of the British position, where Wellington expected Napoleon's attack, and the general calculated that, with the aid of the obstacles so interposed to Napoleon's advance, the troops stationed there would be able to check the tide of invasion until the whole army arrived to their assistance. The country between Brussels and the frontier was reconnoitred, and engineer officers were employed in making sketches of all the positions that appeared likely to offer special advantages as battlefields for an army standing on the defence. Among others, the fields lying in front of the village of Waterloo were mapped, and the spot was specially marked by the Duke as one to be occupied in case the enemy forced a way between the British and Prussian armies. On the 12th of June the Duke of Wellington learned that Napoleon and the Guards had left Paris for the north, and the next day the officer in command of the cavalry outposts reported that the pickets of French cavalry which had so long faced him had disappeared, and that he had learned from some French custom house officers that hostilities were about to commence. On the 15th of June Ralph Conway had gone with Stapleton into Brussels as usual. Everything was going on with its accustomed regularity. A military band was playing in the park. Numbers of well-appointed carriages filled with well-dressed ladies drove to and fro, and crowds of officers and civilians strolled under the trees, greeting their acquaintances and discussing the latest gossip of the town. As to the coming of the French, the topic was so threadbare that no one alluded to it, and no stranger could have imagined from the aspect of the scene that 3 great armies were lying 30 or 40 miles away in readiness to engage at any moment in a desperate struggle. The great subject of talk was the ball that was to be given that evening by the Duchess of Richmond. This was expected altogether to outshine any of the other festivities that had taken place in Brussels during that gay season. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon when the young men saw Captain O'Connor approaching. "Can you young fellows keep a secret?" he asked. "Well, I think so," Ralph laughed. "I suppose you are both going to the ball?" "Well, of course we are. We are both off duty, and Stapleton here is quite absorbed in the thought of the conquests he intends to make." "Well, the secret is this. It's quite possible that you will not go to the ball at all." Why, how is that?" the young officers exclaimed simultaneously. Is the regiment ordered away?" "Not yet, lads, but it may be. I've just seen the colonel. He dined with the Duke at 3 o'clock. There were a lot of officers there, and the Prince of Orange, who had just come in from the outposts for the ball, told him that the Prussians at Thuin were attacked this morning, and that a heavy cannonade was going on when he left. Orders were issued half an hour ago for the whole of the troop to be in readiness to march at a moment's notice. There's no saying yet which way the French may come, and this attack upon the Prussians may be only a feint, so not a soldier can be moved till more is known. The 1st Division is ordered to collect at Ath tonight, the 3rd at Braine-le-Comte, and the 4th at Grammont. The 5th, now that's ours, with the 81st and the Hanoverian Brigade, and the 6th Division, of course collect here. All are to be in readiness to march at a moment's notice. The Prince of Orange is to gather the 2nd and 3rd Dutch Divisions at Nivelles. Of course, this first skirmish may only be intended to feel our force and positions, but at any rate it's a sign that the game is going to begin. But if the orders are issued and the troops are to collect tonight, the secret cannot be kept long. No, by this time the divisional orders will be published, and everyone will know it in an hour or two. There is really no secret about it, lads. If there had been, the colonel wouldn't have told me, and I shouldn't have told you. See, the news is circulating already." A change was indeed taking place in the position of the scene. The loungers were gathering in little groups, talking eagerly and excitedly. The orders for the concentration of the division had become known, though as yet all were in ignorance as to the reason for their issue. The 3 officers joined some of the groups and listened to the talk. The general idea was that the duke had heard that the French were gathering for an attack, and these measures were merely precautionary. It might be days yet before the affair really began. Still, it was important news, and there were pale faces among the ladies at this sudden reminder that the assembly at Brussels was not a mere holiday gathering, but that war, grim, earnest, and terrible, was impending. "We had better be getting back to our quarters," Captain O'Connor said. "Everything will have to be packed up this evening." "But does that mean that the troops are to be under arms all night?" Stapleton asked. "That it does, Stapleton. Of course they won't be kept standing in line, but when troops are ordered to be in readiness to march at a moment's notice on such a business as this, it means that they will all be assembled. Then probably they will be allowed to lie down, and perhaps will light bivouac fires. But it means business, I can tell you." "Then I for one shan't go to the ball," Ralph said. "No doubt it will be a pretty sight, but there have been lots of balls, and this bivouac will be a new experience altogether." "Well, I don't know that you're wrong, Conway," Captain O'Connor said. "Besides, you'll probably find the colonel will issue orders that only a certain number of officers may go. I shall look in for an hour or two just to see the scene, but I don't know many people, and with a room full of generals and colonels, and 3 or 4 men to each lady, there won't be much chance of getting partners." When they reached the village, Stapleton said goodbye to them, as his company lay half a mile further on, and Captain O'Connor and Ralph entered their quarters. They found their servants busy packing up the baggage. "What is this all about, O'Connor?" Lieutenant Desmond asked. "Well, it's in orders that the whole division is to assemble tonight in readiness to march at a moment's notice. News has come that the French have attacked the Prussian outposts, and the duke is not to be caught napping. Of course it may be nothing but an outpost skirmish, still it may be the beginning of operations on a grand scale." "And there is an order," Desmond said dolefully, "that only 1 officer in each company is to go to the ball. You want to go, Desmond?" "Well, of course I should like to go, and so would everyone, I suppose. However, it can't be helped, for of course you will go yourself." "Well, I have made up my mind to look in for an hour or two. Conway doesn't wish to go. I'll tell you how we will arrange it, Desmond. What the order means is that 2 officers must stop with their company. It doesn't matter in the least who they are, so that there are 2 out of the 3 with the men. Dancing will begin about 8 o'clock. I'll look in there at 9. An hour will be enough for me, so I'll come back to the company, and you can slip away and stop there till it's over." "Oh, thank you very much," Desmond said gratefully. "And look here, Desmond, you had better arrange with your man to leave your undress uniform out, so that when you get back from the ball you can slip into it and have the other packed up. At least that's what I'm going to do. I can't afford to have my best uniform spoiled by having to sleep in it in the mud. A captain's pay doesn't run to such extravagance as that." "And what will be done with the baggage if we have to march?" "Oh, I don't suppose we'll march tonight, but if we do, the quartermaster will detail a party to collect all the baggage left behind and put it in store. We needn't bother about that, especially when, for aught we know, we may never come back again to claim it." But although O'Connor did not know it, the duke had by this time received news indicating that the attack upon the Prussian outpost was the beginning of a great movement, and that the whole French army were pressing forward by the road where the Prussian and British army joined hands. At daybreak the French had advanced in 3 columns. The right upon Châtelet, 5 miles below Charleroi and on the Sambre, the centre on Charleroi itself, the left on Marchiennes. Zieten, who was in command of the Prussian corps d'armée, defended the bridges at these points stoutly. and then contested every foot of the ground, his cavalry making frequent charges, so that at the end of the day the French had only advanced 5 miles. This stout resistance enabled Blucher to bring up 2 out of his other 3 corps. Bülow, whose corps was at Liège, 40 miles away, receiving his orders too late to march that day. The rest of the Prussian army concentrated around the villages of Fleurs and Ligny. Accordingly, at 10 o'clock in the evening, orders were issued by Wellington for the 3rd Division to march at once from Braine-le-Comte to Nivelles, for the 1st to move from Enghien to Braine-le-Comte, and for the 2nd and 4th Divisions to march from Ath to Grammont on Enghien. No fresh orders were issued to the troops round Brussels, and although it was known at the ball that the troops were in readiness to march at a moment's notice, there were none except the generals and a few members of the staff who had any idea that the movement was so near at hand. The regiments stationed at a distance from Brussels were assembled in the park by 10 o'clock that evening. Then arms were piled and the men permitted to fall out. Only a few lighted fires, for the night was warm. The artillery, however, who had all along been bivouacked in the park, had their fires going as usual, and round these many of the troops gathered, but the greater part wrapped themselves in their cloaks and went quietly to sleep. Ralph strolled about for an hour or two, chatting with other officers, and looking at the groups of sleepers, and listening to the talk of the soldiers gathered round the fires. Among them were many old peninsular men, whose experience now rendered them authorities among the younger soldiers, who listened eagerly to the details of the desperate struggle at Albuera, the terrible storming of the fortresses, and lighter tales of life and adventure in Spain. Many of the men whose quarters lay near the scene of assembly had been permitted to return to them, with strict orders to be ready to join the ranks should the bugles sound.